Section 1 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Wayne Cooke. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older by Charles Dickens. Time was, with most of us, when Christmas Day encircling all our limited world like a magic ring, left nothing out for us to miss or seek, bound together all our home enjoyments, affections, and hopes, grouped everything and everyone around the Christmas fire, and made the little picture shining in our bright young eyes complete. Time came, perhaps all so soon, when our thoughts overleaped that narrow boundary. When there was someone very dear, we thought then, very beautiful and absolutely perfect, wanting to be the fullness of our happiness. When we were wanting to, or we thought so, which did just as well, at the Christmas hearth by which that someone sat. And when we intertwined with every wreath and garland of our life that someone's name. That was the time for the bright visionary Christmases which have long arisen from us to show faintly, after summer rain, in the palest edges of the rainbow. That was the time for the beautified enjoyment of the things that were to be and never were, and yet the things that were so real in our resolute hope that it would be hard to say now what realities achieved since have been stronger. What, did that Christmas never really come when we and the priceless pearl who was our young choice were received, after the happiest of total impossible marriages, by the two united families previously at daggers drawn on our account? When brothers and sisters-in-law, who had always been rather cool to us before our relationship was effected, perfectly doted on us, and when fathers and mothers overwhelmed us with unlimited incomes? Was that Christmas dinner never really eaten, after which we arose and generously and eloquently rendered honor to our late rival, present in the company, then and there exchanging friendship and forgiveness, and founding an attachment not to be surpassed in Greek or Roman story, which subsisted until death? Has that same rival long ceased to care for that same priceless pearl, and married for money and become usurious? Above all, do we really know now that we should probably have been miserable if we had won and worn the pearl, and that we are better without her? That Christmas when we had recently achieved so much fame, when we had been carried in triumph somewhere for doing something great and good, when we had worn and honored an ennobled name and arrived and were received at home in a shower of tears of joy, is it possible that that Christmas has not come yet? And is our life here, at the best, so constituted that, pausing as we advance at such a noticeable milestone in the track as this great birthday, we look back on the things that never were, as naturally and full as gravely as on the things that have been and are gone, or have been and still are? If it be so, and so it seems to be, must we come to the conclusion that life is little better than a dream, and little worth the loves and strivings that we crowd into it? No, far be such miscalled philosophies from us, dear reader, on Christmas Day. Nearer and closer to our hearts be the Christmas spirit, which is the spirit of active usefulness, perseverance, cheerful discharge of duty, kindness, and forbearance. It is in the last virtues especially that we are, or should be, strengthened by the unaccomplished visions of our youth. For who shall say that they are not our teachers to deal gently even with the impalpable nothings of the earth? Therefore, as we grow older, let us be more thankful that the circle of our Christmas associations and of the lessons that they bring expands. Let us welcome every one of them and summon them to take their places by the Christmas hearth. Welcome, old aspirations, glittering creatures of an ardent fantasy, to your shelter underneath the holly. We know you and have not outlived you yet. Welcome, old projects and old loves, however fleeting, to your nooks among the steadier lights that burn around us. Welcome, all that was ever real to our hearts, and for the earnestness that made you real, thanks to heaven. Do we build no Christmas castles in the clouds now? Let our thoughts, fluttering like butterflies among these flowers of children, bear witness. Before this boy, there stretches out a future, brighter than we ever looked on in our old romantic time, but bright with honor and with truth. Around this little head on which the sunny curls lie heaped, the graces sport as prettily, as airily, as when there was no scythe within the reach of time to shear away the curls of our first love. Upon another girl's face near it, placider but smiling bright, a quiet and contented little face, we see home fairly written. Shining from the word, as rays shine from a star, we see how, when our graves are old, other hopes than ours are young, other hearts than ours are moved, how other ways are smoothed, how other happiness blooms, ripens, and decays. No, not decays, for other homes and other bands of children, not yet in being, nor for ages yet to be, arise and bloom and ripen to the end of all. Welcome everything. Welcome alike what has been and what never was, and what we hope may be, to your shelter underneath the holly, to your places round the Christmas fire, where what is sits open-hearted. In yonder shadow do we see obtruding furtively upon the blaze an enemy's face? By Christmas Day we do forgive him. If the injury he has done us may admit of such companionship, let him come here and take his place. If otherwise, unhappily, let him go hence, assured that he will never injure nor accuse him. On this day we shut out nothing. Pause, says a low voice. Nothing. Think. On Christmas Day we will shut out from our fireside nothing. Not the shadow of a vast city, where the withered leaves are lying deep, the voice replies. Not the shadow that darkens the whole globe. Not the shadow of the city of the dead. Not even that. Of all days in the year, we will turn our faces towards that city upon Christmas Day, and from its silent hosts bring those we loved among us. City of the dead, in the blessed name wherein we are gathered together at this time, and in the presence that is here among us according to the promise, we will receive and not dismiss thy people who are dear to us. Yes, we can look upon these children angels that alight so solemnly, so beautifully, among the living children by the fire, and can bear to think how they departed from us. Entertaining angels unawares, as the patriarchs did, the playful children are unconscious of their guests, but we can see them, can see a radiant arm around one favorite neck, as if there were a tempting of that child away. Among the celestial figures, There is one, a poor misshapen boy on earth, of a glorious beauty now, of whom his dying mother said it grieved her much to leave him here alone for so many years that it was likely would elapse before he came to her, being such a little child. But he went quickly, and was laid upon her breast, and in her hand she leads him. There was a gallant boy who fell far away upon a burning sand beneath a burning sun, and said, "Tell them at home, with my last love, how much I could have wished to kiss them once, but that I died contented and had done my duty." Or there was another, over whom they read the words, "Therefore we commit his body to the deep," and so consigned him to the lonely ocean and sailed on. Or there was another who lay down to his rest in the dark shadows of great forests, and on earth awoke no more. Oh, shall they not, from sand and sea and forest, be brought home at such a time? There was a dear girl, almost a woman, never to be one, who made a morning Christmas in a house of joy, and went her trackless way to the silent city. Do we recollect her, worn out, faintly whispering what could not be heard, and falling into that last sleep for weariness? Oh, look upon her now. Oh, look upon her beauty, her serenity, her changeless youth, her happiness. The daughter of Jairus was recalled to life, to die, but she, more blessed, has heard the same voice saying unto her, "Arise forever." We had a friend who was our friend from early days, with whom we often pictured the changes that were to come upon our lives, and merely imagined how we would speak and walk and think and talk when we came to be old. His destined habitation in the city of the dead received him in his prime. Shall he be shut out from our Christmas remembrance? Would his love have so excluded us? Lost friend, lost child, lost parent, sister, brother, husband, wife, we will not discard you. You shall hold your cherished places in our Christmas hearts and by our Christmas fires. And in the season of immortal hope, and on the birthday of immortal mercy, we will shut out nothing. The winter sun goes down over town and village. On the sea it makes a rosy path, as if the sacred tread were fresh upon the water. A few more moments, and it sinks, and night comes on, and lights begin to sparkle in the prospect. On the hillside beyond the shapelessly diffused town, and in the quiet keeping of the trees that gird the village steeple, remembrances are cut in stone, planted in common flowers, growing in grass, entwined with lowly brambles around many a mound of earth. In town and village there are doors and windows closed against the weather. There are flaming logs heaped high that are joyful faces. There is a healthy music of voices. Be all ungentleness and harm excluded from the temples of the household gods, but be those remembrances admitted with tender encouragement. They are of the time and all its comforting and peaceful reassurances, and of the history that reunited even upon earth the living and the dead, and of the broad beneficences and goodness that too many men have tried to tear to narrow shreds. End of section 1.
Section number 2 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Russell Packer. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. What Christmas Is to a Bunch of People by R.H. Horne. The father of a family rubs his hands with a genial smile when Christmas comes, and yet he now and then raises one finger to the calculating organ of his cranium with rather a thoughtful air, suggestive of certain bills and taxes, which he has resolved shall not weigh upon his mind. Why should they? He will get through his Christmas bills somehow or other, as he has done before. He has no doubt of being able to muster the money to article his eldest son to a highly respectable solicitor. He has already laid up a small portion for his eldest daughter, and makes pretty sure of doing as much for the others by the time they are old enough to be married. He has a good business, his wife is a clever manager, they live happily together. The holly berries smile at him with the well-remembered sparkle of early days. He therefore determines to enjoy the merry season as of old. What if he does see half a dozen more gray hairs displaying themselves, as though to remind him that another year has passed, and a certain line or two in his face does look a trifle deeper than when he had last observed it? What have such small matters to do with the real age of a man? A man is as old as he feels, and no more. The fact is, the father of a family is as young as he was 20 years ago, so he gives his hair an additional and rather flourishing touch with a comb, puts on a new waistcoat, brushes the collar of his coat, and, looking down with complacency on his boots as he sets his hat lightly upon his head, sallies out upon the landing-place and shouts a jaunty inquiry as to when his wife and daughter will be ready to go to church. The boys are gone on before. Meanwhile he stands thrumming a pleased but impatient tattoo with his fingers upon the banisters, and inhaling every now and then a savory whiff of sweet herbs rising up from the kitchen. The mother of a family has a world of anxious thoughts about her. She likes Christmas. It is, no doubt, a pleasant time. There are many sweet memories and hopes attending it, and altogether it must be considered as happy. But the butcher's bill, she knows, must be heavy. The baker's, too. And as for the grocer's, she is almost afraid to think of it. Besides this, there is a new dressmaker's bill, which she has not yet told Mr. Broadback about. But how was all this to be avoided? As to herself, she could not do with less, nor her eldest daughter, especially on the eve of her marriage. A happy marriage she most devoutly hopes it will be. Then there are the growing girls, all of whose dresses have got so shockingly short that she could almost wish the follies of bloomerism had been softened and translated, and entered England under another character, as a Persian, Turkish, or Polish lady's fashions just imported from Paris, so that something economically elegant might have gradually been introduced inch by inch, as it were, to the great saving of the mothers of large families of daughters. As for the bonnet-maker, she must wait. It is unknown what sums have been paid that bonnet-maker in the course of the last 6 years. Perhaps it would be best not to think any more of these matters just at present. At any rate, Mr. Broadback shall have a good Christmas dinner. She will take care of that, and all their relations and friends who are invited shall be made as happy as possible. The eldest son has a mixed feeling about Christmas. He has no very romantic impressions of the study of the law, but he wishes to begin life and to take the first step towards making his way in the world. And as he is to be articled to Mr. Benjamin Sheepskin early in January, he looks upon the intermediate time rather impatiently. At least he would do so, but that his cousin Ellen is to dine with them on Christmas Day, and stay on a visit for a week afterwards, during which there will be round games and forfeits, and he will go partners with his cousin, and dance with her and show her all his law books, and decoy her under the mistletoe bough. And so he expects to pass a very merry time before he goes to the office of Mr. Sheepskin. What Christmas is to the eldest daughter, we may pretty well infer from the increased brightness in her eyes, the frequent blush that suffuses her soft cheeks, the occasional pensive air suddenly awakening up with a smile, the tender sigh, and the additional pains she takes with her beautiful hair, which is never out of order, and yet she thinks it continually needs to be brushed and smoothed and set to rights. To her, Christmas evidently comes with a wedding ring concealed in a wreath of evergreen. Besides the eldest son, there are the boys, and these rollicking young chaps are home for the holidays, and Christmas to them is, weather permitting, an endless succession of sliding and snowballs and hoops and going on the ice, and plum puddings and mince pies and games at blindman's buff, and other romps in the evening with snapdragon after supper. To the youngest child, a little bright-eyed fairy of 5 years old, in a white and sky-blue frock, purple sash, and red shoes, Christmas is a season of romance. It is a whirl of shining hours in which there are new toys of mysterious beauty, and dances and kisses and cakes of all sorts, and sweetmeats and wonderful things made of painted sugar, and all the creatures of the earth, with Noah's Ark in the middle, and brothers and sisters and playmates, the eldest of whom is not yet gone 8, spoken of like a little clock. And Mamma in a new dress, shining with bracelets and a chain and things, and dear Auntie with a busy face making something nice to eat, and loud shouting and crowding around a Christmas tree, all of green and gold with lights and glittering presents of priceless value dangling from every twig, and hidden in deep green recesses of the boughs. This is the true fairyland we have all read so much about. But the maiden aunt, she who so continually sits on one side, out of the way or in the quiet shade of a corner, she who is so continually forgotten except when some kind assistance is needed, shall we, too, forget her? Far from it. We well know what Christmas is to her. All her life is devoted to amiable, disinterested acts of practical aid to all in the house who need it. And the period of Christmas to her is the summing up of a year's account of sympathies and kindly offices, of which she herself takes no note beyond the moment, and which have no place in her memory except to cause a sigh of regret when any gentle service has not effected all the good she intended. What Christmas is to the old housekeeper of a substantial family, more wealthy than the one just described, we must all see at once to be a very serious business indeed. Complicated and full of grave cares, packages of hope, close-covered preparations, and spicy responsibilities. There she stands with her tortoise-shell spectacles and a great bunch of keys dangling over her wide apron. No minister of state thinks more of herself, heaven forgive us, himself, than this old lady does. Her linen closet is a model of neatness and order. Her china closet is set out with the utmost precision, and not without an eye to effect in the prominent display on the highest shelves of the choice old china bowls, basins, teacups, saucers, and an immensely ancient teapot of the ugliest shape imaginable, and covered with very ugly faded paintings of great value. But most of all is her pride and importance in the house, and in her own self-esteem, displayed when she unlocks and opens the door of her storeroom. No one must enter but the housekeeper herself. You may stand outside and lean around the sides of the open door and peep in, but no more. There you see large tea canisters of different sizes, and coffee canisters, and dark slate blue paper bags, and polished wooden spice boxes, tall and round and unscrewing in several places, and boxes of raisins, and a fig drum, and many packets of different sizes, with a large white cone of loaf sugar standing in the midst. We think the youngest child of this family really must be allowed to come in and look about, but not touch anything. And light bundles of dry herbs hanging from nails, and small baskets attached to hooks, and half a German sausage, besides 3 bath chaps swinging by short strings from nails on the edge of the top shelf. While, ranged along the shelves, the child sees a beautiful array of white jam pots and preserve pots, and brown pickle jars, and wide-necked glass bottles full of deep-colored cherries, and preserved gooseberries, plums, apricots, and other fruits, with honey jars and tamarind jars, and beneath each shelf a range of drawers with brass handles, labeled outside with the names of all the nicest and some of the most mysterious things in the eatable world. What this period of the year is to the gardener, we may easily guess, from great armfuls of mistletoe boughs, of holly boughs thick with berries, and of branches of laurel which he is continually carrying into the house, or going with as a present to neighboring houses. And now see him coming along with a bending back, bearing an entire fir tree, which gracefully nods its head as he slowly trudges along, and shakes and rustles all its dry brown cones, as if in dumb anticipation of the peals of bells that will shortly be rung. This fir is for the Christmas tree, the green and simple foundation and superstructure which is shortly destined to sustain so much brightness and romance, so many glittering presents, and to be the medium of so many sweet feelings, joyous hopes, and tender sense of childhood, in present bright visions around us, and in tender recollections of the past. As for the nurse, there can be no doubt but Christmas is a very anxious time for her. She expects so many of the young folks will make themselves very ill with all this quantity of plum pudding and plum cake and mince pies. However, she consoles herself on the whole for any extra trouble she may have in pouring out or mixing and stirring wine glasses of physic, and trying to conceal powders in honey or red currant jelly, and then getting them down by the proud recollection that she had the lady of the house in her arms when a child, and this consciousness makes her feel of the highest importance in the family. But the doctor, the medical attendant of the family, there are no mixed feelings or misgivings in his mind. He hears all of the preparations, all the nice things, and shakes his head gravely at the lady of the house. But the instant he is outside the door, he hurries homeward, rubbing his knuckles. He knows. The black coat of the vicar has a richer and more prominent tone of black as he walks across the broad snow of his 7-acre field towards the stile that leads into the lane that runs to the vestry door of the church. The snow-covered hedges with frosted twigs at top nod and glisten to him as he moves briskly onward, pointing his church and stately black toe along the narrow path beside the deep cart rut with its rough and jagged ridges. Christmas to him is a series of dinners and offerings and good things and compliments and wedding fees and burial fees and christening fees and charity sermons, exhorting the rich to remember the poor and exhorting the poor to be meek and contented and trust to Providence. Meantime, the curate goes to tea parties and has a great deal to do in the details of church business affairs, as the vestries are often very troublesome, and has much to do in visiting the sick and administering religious consolation and riding on horseback to do double duty, morning service here, afternoon there, evening service here again or somewhere else. This is the ordinary, regular, hard-working, useful curate. But if he be a spruce young Puseyite curate, in a black silk sacerdotal dress waistcoat, with a narrow, stiff white necktie and a black superfine frock coat, cut to the quick, then he very often rivals the vicar in his dinner parties, and gives him the go-by in evening parties, where he clean carries off most of the young ladies for a little intense talk of divine things in one corner of the room. If Christmas be a great fact to the beadle seems a greater fact to Christmas. New broadcloth, new scarlet and gold, new gold-laced cocked hat of old Lord Mayor fashion, new gold-headed cane. No wonder that all the little charity boys eye his inflated presence with additional awe. No wonder that it is inflated, for he is swollen with the substantial comforts derived from all the great kitchens in the neighborhood. There is a roasted ox in his mind. He can never forget the year when one was roasted whole upon the ice, and he present, and allowed to take his turn with the basting ladle. It was the epic event of his life. The beadle is generally able to frown the charity boys into awe and silence, assisting the said frown every now and then with a few cuts of a long yellow twining cane during service, whereby, amidst the sonorous tones of the preacher, there often breaks out a squealing cry from the hollow and remote aisles, or distant rows of heads in the organ loft, to the great injury of the eloquence of the pastor, and the gravity of the junior portion of his congregation. But though this parish terror of the poor has portentous frowns for most of those under his dominion, he knows how to patronize with a smile, and his rubicund beams, at all seasons of festival, and more especially at Christmas, fall encouragingly upon all the cooks of the best houses round about. Perhaps upon the chief bell-ringer, perhaps we may say upon all the bell-ringers, and now and then upon the sexton, with whom he does a little private business in the way of gratuities from mourning relatives who come to visit graves. But as for the pew-opener, envy of her gains at Christmas, and her obduracy in concealing their extent, renders him a foe to her existence, and haughtily unconscious of her presence as often as he can affect not to see her. There was, once upon a time, a good beadle, who married a pew-opener, but it was a long while ago, so long that it is thought to have been in the good old. Christmas is not what it was to the postman. The government has interfered sadly with his collection of boxes from house to house, so that now he only receives gratefully a shilling here and there in streets where formerly he had but to announce, after a loud double rap, that the postman is called for his Christmas box, and down came the shilling, almost as a lawful right. He looks melancholy as he sits on the bench outside a country public house, and when the landlord inquires the cause, he hints at the altered times. But he does not get much sympathy in this quarter, for the publican feels that the alteration is considerably in his favor. He has had a new beer machine for his bar, all beautiful with inlaid brass and ivory. He has added a wing to his house, and he feels a proud consciousness that, if all his town relatives live in palaces, he is quite as important to the sinners, his subjects, in the country. To the cattle drover, this is a season of arduous business, by day and by night, urging his fatigue and often refractory beasts along the dark roads. And when they enter among the many lights and glare of London, as they sometimes do in the evening, what Christmas is to the poor cattle, as well as the men, may be conjectured, and all things considered, one may fairly say the oxen have the worst of it. The shepherd who is driving a flock of sheep to the Christmas market seldom sees much amusement by the way. Events with him are rare, but the journey of the pig drovers up to town is always a checkered history. One pig or another is sure to be of an original turn of mind, and several are sure to follow his example for a little while, and then branch off into a line of conduct suited exclusively to their own individuality. Under cartwheels, dodging round pumps, hiding noses behind tree trunks in the country, and behind theatrical boards in the front of town shops, rushing into hedges and round haystacks, as the drove moves unwillingly along lanes and roads, and into wine cellars and round lamp-posts and up all manner of streets in London. The turkey drover has also a very busy time of it just now, and the goose drover far more. The greater difficulty attending the flocks of geese is not because they are so much more numerous than the turkeys, as on account of the perverse, irritable, and stupid conditions of mind which alternate with the goose. It is to be remembered that the warlike turkey-cock, so aptly called in Scotland the bubbly jock, and the mature, fierce-necked, wing-threatening, universally assaulting gander, being preserved by their toughness, are not present in these festive processions. We speak only of the young and middle-aged turkey and goose. But while we give the degree of difficulty in their safe conduct very much to the side of the latter, we are almost disposed to agree with the eminent poet, who has sung its praises in another sense, finally combining with that praise a kind of hint at a moral justification for its death. Of all the fowls that stalk the farm, the goose must be preferred. There is so much of nutriment in that weak-minded bird. Christmas to the butcher is nothing less than a bazaar of fine meat, displayed with all the elegancies, they are not numerous, of which his craft is susceptible. With a smiling countenance and ruddy cheek, he walks backwards and forwards, through his shop all hung with choice specimens of last year's grass, the sun gleaming across them by day, and the gas shining at night upon the polished surfaces and delicate white fat, and sparkling amidst the branches of holly stuck about in all directions. He very much approves of the vigorous way in which one of his men continues to bawl in a sharp, quick tone, "Now then, to buy, to buy!" when the most unlikely people or when no people at all are passing. It all looks like business and bustle. The baker stands amidst his walls of loaves built up, shelf upon shelf, with other shelves packed close with quartern and half-quartern paper bags of flour, and he glances from the topmost tier down to the flour-whitened trap-door in one corner of the shop floor, wherefrom appears an ascending tray, heaped up with long French rolls, cottage loaves, twists, rusks, and hot-spiced gingerbread nuts. This loaded tray continues to rise upon a man's head, which is gradually followed by his body, and the whole structure approaching the counter is speedily unloaded. In less than half an hour, all that was thus brought from below has disappeared. The walls of loaves have diminished in great gaps. More loaves come smoking in to supply their places, and more trays of rolls, twists, gingerbread nuts, and fancy bread with piles of biscuits ascend through the trap door. The baker has a nice-looking daughter, as most bakers in England have, and she now comes in smiling and displaying a row of pearly teeth and assists in taking money. They both agree that although summer has its advantages, there is no time of the year so pleasant as Christmas. The grocer is one of the most flourishing men in all the world at this season. His shop is a small and overcrowded epitome of the produce of the East. He is evidently in constant correspondence with China, has the most friendly relations in India, is on familiar terms with the Spice Islands, has confidential friends in Egypt, Barbary, and on Candy's shore, while, as to Jamaica and other West India islands, he has a box, a cask, or a case by every post, to say nothing of Arabia, France, Greece, Spain, Italy, and in fine, all the trading ports of the Mediterranean Sea. To the grocer, we may fairly say that Christmas is a general shaking by the hand, with fingers extremely sticky, of foreign relations and agents in every country, whence something good to eat, in the shape of dried fruits, spices, teas, coffees, sugars, preserves, and condiments, are possible to be procured. If he has a newly arrived Chinese picture, inlaid caddy, monster idol, or teapot, now is his time to make a feature of it in his window. The greengrocer is a genuine Englishman. He cannot boast of the foreign commodities of the tea and sugar mountebank over the way. He has no wish to do it. He deals entirely in home produce. All that he sells is the natural result of the cultivation of the soil of his native country. From celery, beetroot, sea kale, and cabbage sprouts to Jerusalem artichokes and sage and onions, all of English growth. He could very easily hollow out a turnip, cut eyes, nose, and mouth in it, stick a bit of candle inside, and then set it up for a show all among the endive and parsley in the middle of his window on Christmas Eve. But he scorns all such attempts to attract public attention. It may be very well for the grocer over the way, but that sort of thing won't do for a man who deals in natural greens. Christmas, to the pastry cook, is the season when the human mind, if well regulated, is chiefly occupied in the contemplation of mince pies, also in eating them, and decidedly in paying for them. But a very large consumption of holiday plum cakes is not the less expected by the patriotic pastry cook. There is another yet greater event in his mind, though he does not break ground with this till after Christmas Day, and that is the advance of Twelfth Night, While, therefore, he expects the public to be solely occupied with mince pies and other seasonable matters, he is secretly at work in the production of a full set, we forget how many he told us made a set, of the richest and most elaborately decorated and dramatized 12th cakes, which the juvenile world of England has ever yet beheld. The man's half crazy. His wife says he gets no sleep with thinking of his cakes. The other night he started up in bed and cried out, "Sugar frost and whitening," till his nightcap stood on end. Though why on earth, as the good lady remarked, on second thoughts, he should talk of whitening, she couldn't form the remotest idea in life. No doubt Christmas is the season which calls forth the most unmitigated hatred of poachers in the breast of the patriotic poulterer. He says they are pests of society and the wickedest men going. There is no excuse for strong fellows leading an idle life, as most of the poachers do. It is worse than idle. He calls it thievish and villainous. He would be the last man in all England to encourage such doings. On the contrary, he would show them no mercy. Every man-jack of them that could be caught, he would send for 2 or 3 days to hard work on Primrose Hill. After this, they would become better and wiser men, more industrious, more cautious, not so full of talk in beer-houses, more punctual and reliable, altogether more useful members of society. But as for his show of hares and other game, this Christmas, he will warrant every one as having been honestly come by and duly paid for, and not too high for immediate eating. What a capital show he makes this year! 120 long legs, as he familiarly calls the hares, 300 rabbits, 50 brace of pheasants, 90 brace of birds, 20 brace of woodcocks, 30 brace of snipe, 150 brace of pigeons, 200 turkeys, 300 geese, with wild ducks, tame ducks, and barn-door fowls innumerable. The inside of his shop is full in every corner. From countless hooks hang rows of turkeys by the necks, and long double chains of sausages, and rows of ducks, and rows of fowls, all dangling by the necks too, and in full feather, while his shelves present compact arrays of fowls plucked and trussed, and powdered and blown up in the breast with a blowpipe, their livers and gizzards tucked neatly, like opera hats under their pinions. Rows of them also, like small batteries, front the street. The outside of his house, even up to the second-floor window, is hung with hares, rabbits, pheasants, wild ducks, turkeys, and partridges. But if Christmas is a season of greatness to some, of hilarity to many, of importance to all, it is preeminently a season of equal anxiety and splendor to the cook. Her long kitchen range is a perfect bonfire from morning to night, while the various bright utensils which are placed upon the chimney-piece and on the walls at both sides of it are profusely interspersed with twigs and boughs of holly. "Now do get out of my way, all of you! Don't you see how much I have got on my mind with this Christmas dinner? Where's Jane? Jane Stokes! Oh, the plague of kitchen maids! They're always out of the way at the moment they're most wanted. Barbara, are the vegetables washed? Not yet, cook. It's always not yet with them scullery girls." Oh, how the cook wishes there were no need for any help from any soul alive, if so be as she could but do everything herself, which is that is where it is and all about it. But the Christmas dinner don't get spoiled. By no means. Everything turns out excellently, and compliments like full-blown cabbage roses are showered upon cook from the visitors of the hospitable board. They are brought to her as she sits wiping her forehead, and all her face and throat, in a cool and remote corner. Her heart expands, she loves all mankind, and she retires to rest, after a small glass of cordial, at peace with herself and all the world. End of section number 2.
Section 3 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Deanna Lee. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. An Idyll for Christmas Indoors by Edmund Ollier. The houses were decked with evergreens in December, that the sylvan spirits might repair to them and remain unnipped with frost and cold winds until a milder season had renewed the foliage of their abodes. Brand's Popular Antiquities. Scene: a room by twilight on Christmas Eve, the fire burning with a sleepy red, branches of holly, laurel, and mistletoe hanging on the walls, a sylvan spirit sitting in each plant. Spirit of the Holly. The icy streams are black and slow, the icy wind goes sighing, sighing, and far around and deep below, the great broad blank unfeatured snow on the idle earth is lying, and the birds in the air are dying. Just now, ere the day beamed fled, out of doors I thrust my head, and saw the livid western light shrink up like an eye bewitched at the staring of the night. The bare branches writhed and twitched, and the holly bushes old chattered among themselves for cold, and scraped their leaves 'gainst one another, and nestled close like child with mother. Aye, not all the globy fire of their berries, scarlet hot, which the mortals all admire, could their bodies warm a jot. They looked heavy and said, God wot! The nested birds sat close together, plaining of the mournful weather, and the tough and tangled hedges, near and distant, marked the track of the roadway and the edges of the fields with lines of black. Soon I skipped all shivering back. Here, beneath the sheltering eaves of the ceiling dry and warm, air like breath of summer weaves in between my glossy leaves, doing me no harm. And the Christmas spirit benign sparkles in my heart like wine. Spirit of the Laurel. Gone is summer's warmth and light, gone are the rich red autumn days, and winter old and winter white sits moodily in the open ways. Like a great dumb marble statue bideth he upon the wold, and his grey eyes staring at you make you also dumb with cold. And the woods grow lean and swarth in the vexings of the north, filled with sighings and lamentations of the winged forest nations, who, beneath their shattered bowers, wonder at the gusty showers and the length of the dark hours. But the indoor year is bright with the flush of Christmas light, and the breath of that glad comer kindles with a second summer, in the which blithe hearts are seen bursting into tenfold green, till they sit embowered and sing under their own blossoming. Therefore we, the woodland fairies, hold at present with the Larrys, leaving winter for the noon of this glowing household June, whereunto an added splendor preternatural we render, quickening as with inward soul the intensely burning coal. Spirit of the Mistletoe. Behind the night young morn is sleeping, and new hope underlies old weeping. So, though all the woods are stark, and the heavens are drowsy dark, earth within her shadows dun swings about the golden sun, firm and steadily, true and readily, strong in her pulses every one. In a deadly sleep she seems, but her heart is full of dreams, full of dreaming and of vision, subtle, typical, Elysian, out of which in time shall rise all the New Year's verities. And the spirit within her veins laughs and leaps like April rains, warming with electric breath the dark coldness underneath, where, close shut from human seeing, lie the secret nests of being, and the embryo phantoms, hosts of pale antenatal ghosts, bloodless germs of flowers and leaves, from which the Lady Spring receives, when they wake to life, the flush of her many-colored blush. Meanwhile, every shade of sadness melts away in Christmas gladness. Green old Christmas, he doth bring with him his peculiar spring, newly germinating kindness, mutual help in human blindness, closing of old wounds, fresh greetings, souls aflow at genial meetings, hovering fancies, loving laughter, and the grave thoughts coming after. All that lightness, brightness, dancing, interflowing, rainbow glancing, awful sweetness, winged with pleasure, of a heart that has no measure. All. Therefore will we here remain, till the woods are green again, and the sun makes golden glooms in the forest's pillared rooms. Here we can abide together through the fire-lit Christmas weather, and though none may us descry, such the sense of mystery, the hot feasting and loud joy, which uncurbed themselves destroy, and die childless. For true mirth, like the heaven-embraced earth, shall be large and full, yet bound by the haunted depths all around. End of section 3.
Section number 4 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Russell Packer. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. Section 4. What Christmas Is in Country Places by Harriet Martineau. If we want to see the good old Christmas, the traditional Christmas of Old England, we must look for it in the country. There are lasting reasons why the keeping of Christmas cannot change in the country as it may in towns. The seasons themselves ordain the festival. The close of the year is an interval of leisure in agricultural regions, the only interval of complete leisure in the year, and all influences and opportunities concur to make it a season of holiday and festivity. If the weather is what it ought to be at that time, the autumn crops are in the ground, and the springing wheat is safely covered up with snow. Everything is done for the soil that can be done at present, and as for the clearing and trimming and repairing, all that can be looked to in the after part of the winter, and the planting is safe if done before Candlemas. The plashing of hedges, and cleaning of ditches, and trimming of lanes, and mending of roads can be got through between Twelfth Night and the early spring ploughing, and a fortnight may well be given to jollity and complete change. Such a holiday requires a good deal of preparation. So Christmas is, in this way also, a more weighty affair in the rural districts than elsewhere. The strong beer must be brewed, the pigs must be killed weeks before, the lard is wanted, the bacon has to be cured, the hams will be in request, and if brawn is sent to the towns, it must be ready before the children come home for the holidays. Then there is the fattening of the turkeys and geese to be attended to, a score or two of them to be sent to London, and perhaps half a dozen to be enjoyed at home. When the gentleman or the farmer or the country shopkeeper goes to the great town for his happy boys and girls, he has a good deal of shopping to do. Besides carrying a note to the haberdasher and ordering coffee, tea, dried fruit, and spices, he must remember not to forget the packs of cards that will be wanted for loo and whist. Perhaps he carries a secret order for fiddle strings from a neighbor who is practicing his part in good time. There is one order of persons in the country to whom the month of December is anything but a holiday season, the cooks. Don't tell us of town cooks in the same breath. It is really overpowering to the mind to think what the country cooks have to attend to. The goose pie alone is an achievement to be complacent about, even the most ordinary goose pie. Still more, a superior one, with a whole goose in the middle, and another cut up and laid round, with a fowl or two, and a pheasant or two, and a few larks put into odd corners, and the top all shiny with white of egg, figured over with leaves of pastry and tendrils and crinkle-crankles, with a bunch of the more delicate bird feet standing up in the middle. The oven is the cook's child and slave, the great concern of her life at this season. She pets it, she humors it, she scolds it, and she works it without rest. Before daylight she is at it, baking her oat bread, that bread which requires such perfect behavior on the part of the oven. Long lines of oat cakes hang overhead to grow crisp before breakfast, and these are to be put away when crisp to make room for others, for she can hardly make too much. After breakfast and all day she is making and baking meat pies, mince pies, sausage rolls, fruit pies, and cakes of all shapes, sizes, and colors. And at night, when she can scarcely stand for fatigue, she banks the oven fire, and puts in the great jar of stock for the soups, that the drawing may go on from all sorts of savory odds and ends, while everything but the drowsy fire is asleep. She wishes the dear little lasses would not come messing and fussing about, making gingerbread and cheesecakes. She would rather do it herself than have them in her way, but she has not the heart to tell them so. On the contrary, she gives them ginger and cuts the citron peel bountifully for them, hoping the while that the weather will be fine enough for them to go into the woods with their brothers for holly and ivy. Meantime, the dairywoman says, what she declares every Christmas, that she never saw such demand for cream and butter, and that before Twelfth Night there will be none. And how, at that season, can she supply eggs by scores, as she is expected to do? The gingerbread baked, the rosiest apples picked out from their straw in the apple closet. The cats and dogs and canary birds played with and fed. The little lasses run out to see what the boys are about. The woodman wants something else than green to dress the house with. They are looking for the thickest and hardest and knottiest block of wood they can find that will go into the kitchen chimney. A gnarled stump of elm will serve their purpose best, and they trim it into a size to send home. They fancy that their holiday is to last as long as this log remains, and they are satisfied that it will be uncommonly difficult to burn up this one. This done, one of them proceeds with the boys and girls to the copses where the hollies are the thickest, and by carrying his bill-hook he saves a vast deal of destruction by rending and tearing. The poor little birds, which make the hollies so many aviaries in winter, coming to feed on the berries and to pop in among the shining leaves for shelter, are sadly scared, and out they flit on all sides, and away to the great oak where nobody will follow them. For, alas, there is no real mistletoe now. There is to be something so-called hung from the middle of the kitchen ceiling, that the lads and lasses may snatch kisses and have their fun, but it will have no white berries, and no juridical dignity about it. It will be merely a bush of evergreen, called by some a mistletoe, and by others the bob, which is supposed to be a corruption of bough. When all the party have got their faggots tied up and strung over their shoulders, and buttonholes, hats, and bonnets stuck with sprigs and gay with berries, it is time they were going home. For there is a vast deal to be done this Christmas Eve, and the sunshine is already between the hills, in soft yellow gushes, and not on them. A vast deal there is to be done, and especially if there is any village near. First, there is to dress the house with green, and then to go and help to adorn the church. The bob must not be hung up until tomorrow, but every door has a branch over it, and the leads of the latticed windows are stuck with sprigs, and every picture frame and looking-glass and candlestick is garnished. Any scraps, very young children, who are too small to help, pick up scattered holly leaves and, being not allowed to go upon the rug, beg somebody to throw them into the fire, whence ensues a series of cracklings and sputtering blazes, and lighting up of wide-open eyes. In the midst of this, hark! Is that not the church bell? The boys go out to listen, and report that it is so. The Christmas deal, or dole, is about to begin. So, off go all who are able, up to the church. It is very cold there, and dim and dreary, in spite of the candles and the kindness and other good things that are collected there. By the time the bell has ceased to clang, there are a few gentlemen there, and a number of widows and aged men and orphan children. There are piles of blankets and bits of paper which are orders for coals. One gentleman has sent a bag of silver money, and another 2 or 3 sheep, cut up ready for cooking, and another a great pile of loaves. The boys run and bring down a ladder to dress the pillars, and scuffle in the galleries, and venture into the pulpit, under pretense of dressing the church. When the dole is done and the poor people gone, the doors are closed, and, if the boys remain, they must be quiet, for the organist and the singers are going to rehearse the anthem that is to be sung tomorrow. If the boys are not quiet, they are turned out. There is plenty of bustle in the village. The magistrates are in the long room of the inn settling justice business. The inn looks as if it were illuminated. The waiters are seen to glide across the hall, and on the steps are the old constable and the new rural policeman, and the tax collector and the postman. It is so cold that something steaming hot will soon be brought for them to drink, and the poor postman will be taken on his weak side. Christmas is a trying season to him, with his weak head and his popularity and his Christmas boxes and his constant liability to be reported. Cold as it is, there are women flitting about, going to or from the grocer's shop, and all bringing away the same things. The grocers give away, this night, to their regular customers, a good mold candle each and a nutmeg. This is because the women must be up by candlelight tomorrow to make something that is to be spiced with nutmeg. So a good number of women pass by with a candle and a nutmeg, and some, with a bottle or pitcher, come up the steps and go to the bar for some rum. But the clock strikes supper time, and away go the boys home. Somebody wonders at supper whether the true oval mince pie is really meant to be in the form of a certain manger, and its contents to signify the gifts, various and rich, brought by the Magi to that manger. And while the little ones are staring at this news, somebody else observes that it was a pretty idea of the old pagans in our island of dressing up their houses with evergreens, that there might be a warm retreat for the spirits of the woods in times of frost and bitter winter storms. Some child peeps timidly up at the biggest branch in the room, and fancies what it would be to see some sprites sitting under a leaf or dancing along a spray. When supper is done, and the youngest are gone to bed, having been told not to be surprised if they should hear the stars singing in the night, the rest of the party turn to the fire, and begin to roast their chestnuts in the shovel, and to heat the elder wine in the old-fashioned saucepan, silvered inside. One absent boy, staring at the fire, starts when his father offers him a chestnut for his thoughts. He hesitates, but his curiosity is vivid, and he braves all the consequences of saying what he is thinking about. He wonders whether he might, just for this once, go to the stalls when midnight has struck, and see whether the oxen are kneeling. He has heard, and perhaps read, that the oxen kneeled on the first Christmas day, and kept the manger warm with their breath, and that all oxen still kneel in their stalls when Christmas Day comes in. Father and mother exchange a quick glance of agreement to take this seriously, and they explain that there is now so much uncertainty since the new style of reckoning the days of the year was introduced, that the oxen cannot be depended on, and it is not worthwhile to be out of bed at midnight for the chance. Some say the oxen kneel punctually when Old Christmas comes in, and if so, they will not do it tonight. This is not the quietest night of the year, even if nobody visits the oxen. Soon after all are settled to sleep, sounds arise which thrill through some who are half awakened by them, and then, remembering something about the stars singing, the children rouse themselves and lie with open eyes and ears, feeling that Christmas morning has come. They must soon, one would think, give up the star theory, for the music is only 2 fiddles, or a fiddle and clarionet, or possibly a fiddle and drum, with a voice or two which can hardly be likened to that of the spheres. The voices sing, while shepherds watch their flocks by night, and then, marvelously enough, single out this family of all the families on the earth to bless with the good wishes of the season. They certainly are wishing to master and mistress and all the young ladies and gentlemen good morning, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Before this celestial mystery is solved, and before the distant twang of the fiddle is quite out of hearing, the celestial mystery of sleep enwraps the other, and lays it to rest until the morrow. The boys, the elder ones, meant to keep awake, first for the waits, and afterwards to determine for themselves whether the cock crows all night on Christmas Eve, to keep all hurtful things from walking the earth. When the waits are gone, they just remember that any night between this and Old Christmas will do for the cock, which is said to defy evil spirits in this manner for the whole of that season, which the boys are very glad to remember, for they are excessively sleepy, so off they go into the land of dreams. It is now past 2, and at 3 the maids must be up. Christmas morning is the one of all the year when, in the north of England especially, families make a point of meeting, and it must be at the breakfast table. In every house far and near, where there is fuel and flour, and a few pence to buy currants, there are cakes making, which everybody must eat of, cakes of pastry with currants between the layers. The grocer has given the nutmeg, and those who can afford it add rum and other dainties. The ladies are up betimes, to set out the best candlesticks, to garnish the table, to make the coffee, and to prepare a welcome for all who claim a seat. The infant in arms must be there as 7 o'clock strikes. Any married brother or sister living within reach must be there with the whole family train. Long before sunrise there they sit, in the glow of the fire and the glitter of candles, chatting and laughing and exchanging good wishes. In due time the church bell calls the flock of worshippers from over hill and down dale and along commons and across fields. And presently they are seen coming, all in their best, the majority probably saying the same thing, that, somehow, it seems always to be fine on Christmas Day. Then one may reckon up the exceptions he remembers, and another may tell of different sorts of fine weather that he has known. How, on one occasion, his daughter gathered 34 sorts of flowers in their own garden on Christmas Day, and the rose bushes had not lost their leaves on 12th Day. And then the wise will agree how much they prefer a good seasonable frost and sheeted snow like this to April weather in December. Service over, the bell silent, and the sexton turning the key in the lock, off run the young men, out of reach of remonstrance, to shoot until dinner at least, more probably until the light fails. They shoot almost anything that comes across them, but especially little birds. Chaffinches, blackbirds, thrushes, any winged creature distressed by the cold or betrayed by the smooth and cruel snow. The little children at home are doing better than their elder brothers. They are putting out crumbs of bread for the robins, and feeling sorry and surprised that robins prefer bread to plum pudding. They would have given the robins some of their own pudding if they had but liked it. In every house there is dinner today, of one sort or another, except where the closed shutter shows that the folk are out to dinner. The commonest dinner in the poorer houses, in some parts of the country, is a curious sort of mutton pie. The meat is cut off a loin of mutton, and reduced to mouthfuls, and then stewed over with currants or raisins and spice, and the whole covered in with a stout crust. In some places the dinner is baked meat and potatoes. In too many cottages there is nothing better than a morsel of bacon to flavor the bread or potatoes. But it may be safely said that there is more and better dining in England on Christmas Day than on any other day of the year. In the houses of gentry and farmers, the dinner and dessert are a long affair, and soon followed by tea, that the sports may begin. Everybody knows what these sports are in parlor, hall, and kitchen. Singing, dancing, cards, blindman's buff, and other such games. Forfeits, ghost storytelling, snapdragon, these with a bountiful supper interposed, lasting till midnight. In scattered houses among the wilds, card-playing goes on briskly. Wherever there are Wesleyans enough to form a congregation, they are collected at a tea drinking in their chapel, and they spend the evening in singing hymns. Where there are Germans settled, or any leading family which has been in Germany, there is a Christmas tree lighted up somewhere. Those Christmas trees are as prolific as the inexhaustible cedars of Lebanon. Wherever one strikes root, a great number is sure to spring up under its shelter. However spent, the evening comes to an end. The hymns in the chapel and the carols in the kitchen and the piano in the parlor are all hushed. The ghosts have glided by into the night. The forfeits are redeemed. The blind man has recovered his sight and lost it again in sleep. The dust of the dancers has subsided. The fires are nearly out, and the candles quite so. The reflection that the great day is over would have been too much for some little hearts, sighing before they slept, but for the thought that tomorrow is Boxing Day, and that 12th night is yet to come. But first will come New Year's Eve, with its singular inconvenience, in some districts, of nothing whatever being carried out of the house for 24 hours, lest in throwing away anything, you should be throwing away some luck for the next year. Not a potato paring, nor a drop of soap suds or cabbage water, not a cinder, nor a pinch of dust must be removed till New Year's morning. In these places there is one person who must be stirring early, the darkest man in the neighborhood. It is a serious thing there to have a swarthy complexion and black hair, for the owner cannot refuse to his acquaintance the good luck of his being the first to enter their houses on New Year's Day. If he is poor, or his time precious, he is regularly paid for his visit. He comes at daybreak, with something in his hand, if it is only an orange or an egg, or a bit of ribbon, or a 2-penny pitcher. He can't stay a minute. He has so many to visit, but he leaves peace of mind behind him. His friends begin the year with the advantage of having seen a dark man enter their house the first in the new year. Such, in its general features, is Christmas throughout the rural districts of Old England. Here the revelers may be living in the midst of pastoral levels all sheeted with snow. There in deep lanes or round a village green, with ploughed slopes rising on either hand. Here on the spurs of mountains, with glittering icicles hanging from the grey precipices above them, and the accustomed waterfall bound in silence by the frosts beside their doors. And there again they may be within hearing of the wintry surge, booming along the rocky shore, but the revelry is of much the same character everywhere. There may be one old superstition in one place and another in another, but that which is no superstition is everywhere. The hospitality, the mirth, the social glow which spreads from heart to heart, which thaws the pride and the purse strings, and brightens the eyes and affections. End of section number 4.
Chapter 5 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older, and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older, and Other Stories. What Christmas Is in the Company of John Doe, by George Augustus Sala. I have kept, amongst a store of jovial, genial, heart-stirring returns of the season, some very dismal Christmases. I have kept Christmas in Constantinople, at a horrible Pera hotel, where I attempted the manufacture of a plum pudding from the macaroni soup they served me for dinner, mingled with some Zante currants and a box of figs I had brought from Smyrna, and where I sat until very late at night, endeavouring to persuade myself that it was cold and Christmassy, though it wasn't, drinking Levant wine and listening to the howling of the dogs outside, mingled with the clank of a portable fire engine, which some soldiers were carrying to one of those extensive conflagrations which never happen in Constantinople oftener than 3 times a day. I have kept Christmas on board a Boulogne packet, in company with a basin, several despair-stricken females, and a damp steward, who, to all our inquiries whether we should be in soon, had the one unvarying answer of "pretty near" to give. I have kept Christmas, when a boy, at a French boarding school, where they gave me nothing but lentils and bouilli for dinner on the auspicious day itself. I have kept Christmas by the bedside of a sick friend, and wished him the compliments of the season in his physic bottles, had they contained another 6 months' life, poor soul. I have kept Christmas at rich men's tables, where I have been uncomfortable, and once in a cobbler's shop, where I was excessively convivial. I have spent 1 Christmas in prison. Start not, urbane reader. I was not sent there for larceny, nor for misdemeanour, but for debt. It was Christmas Eve, and my name is Prooper, was taking my walks abroad. I walked through the crowded Strand, elate, hilarious, benignant, for the feast was prepared and the guests were bidden. Such a turkey I had ordered, not the prize one with the ribbons, I mistrusted that, but a plump, tender, white-breasted bird, a king of turkeys. It was to be boiled with oyster sauce, and the rest of the Christmas dinner was to consist of that noble sirloin of roast beef and that immortal cod's head and shoulders. I had bought the materials for the pudding too, some half-hour previously, the plums and the currants, the citron and the allspice, the flour and the eggs. I was happy. Onward by the bright grocers' shops thronged with pudding purchasers, onward by the booksellers, though lingering, it may be for a moment, by the gorgeous Christmas books with their bright binding and brighter pictures. Onward by the pastry cooks, onward, elate, hilarious and benignant, until, just as I stopped by a poulterer's shop to admire the finest capon that ever London or Christmas saw, a hand was laid on my shoulder. "Before our sovereign lady the Queen, by the grace of God, greeting, that you take the body of Thomas Prooper and him safely keep, and for so doing this shall be your warrant." These dread and significant words swam before my dazzled eyelids, dancing maniac hornpipes on a parchment slip of paper. I was to keep Christmas in no other company than that of the once celebrated fictitious personage, supposed to be the familiar of all persons similarly situated, John Doe. I remembered with horror that some fortnight previously a lawyer's clerk deposited on my shoulder a slip of paper, which he stated to be the copy of a writ, and in which Her Majesty the Queen, mixed up for the nonce with John Lord Campbell, was pleased to command me to enter an appearance somewhere by such a day in order to answer the plaint of somebody who said I owed him some money. Now, an appearance had not been entered, and judgment had gone by default, and execution had been obtained against me. The Sheriff of Middlesex, who is popularly, though erroneously, supposed to be incessantly running up and down in his bailiwick, had had a writ of fieri facius, vulgarly termed a fee-far, against my goods. But hearing, or satisfying himself by adroit espionage, that I had no goods, he had made a return of nulla bona. Then had he invoked the aid of a more subtle and potential instrument, likewise on parchment, called a capias ad satisfaciendum, abbreviated in legal parlance into ca-sa, against my body. This writ he had confided to Aminadab, his man, and Aminadab, running, as he was in duty bound to do, up and down in his section of the bailiwick, had come across me and had made me the captive of his bow and spear. He called it, less metaphorically, nabbing me. Mr. Aminadab, tall, aquiline-nosed, oleaginous, somewhat dirty, clad in a green Newmarket coat, a crimson velvet waistcoat, a purple satin neckcloth with gold flowers, 2 watchguards and 4 diamond rings. Mr. Aminadab proposed that something should be done. Would I go to Whitecross Street at once, or to Blowman's in Cursitor Street, or would I just step into Peel's coffee house for a moment? Mr. Aminadab was perfectly polite and indefatigably suggestive. The capture had been made in Fleet Street, so we stepped into Peel's, and while Mr. Aminadab sipped the pint of wine which he had obligingly suggested I should order, I began to look my position in the face. Execution taken out for £45, 9 and 9pence. Car sa a guinea, fee fa a guinea, capture a guinea. Those were all the costs as yet. Now, some days after I was served with the writ, I had paid the plaintiff's lawyer on account £30. In the innocence of my heart, I imagined that, by the County Court Act, I could not be arrested for the balance, it being under £20. Mr. Aminadab laughed with contemptuous pity. "We don't do business that way," said he. "We goes in for the whole lot, and then you pleads your set-off, you know." The long and the short of the matter was that I had £18, 12 shillings and 9pence to pay before my friend in the purple neckcloth would relinquish his grasp, and that to satisfy the demand I had exactly the sum of £2, 2 and a halfpenny, and a gold watch, on which a relation of mine would probably advance £4 more. So I fell to writing letters, Mr. Aminadab sipping the wine and playing with one of his watch chains in the meanwhile. I wrote to Jones, Brown and Robinson, to Thompson and to Jackson likewise. I wrote to my surly uncle in Pudding Lane. Now was the time to put the disinterested friendship of Brown to the test, to avail myself of the repeated offers of service from Jones, to ask for the loan of that 6pence which Robinson had repeatedly declared was at my command as long as he had a shilling. I sealed the letters with an unsteady hand and consulted Mr. Aminadab as to their dispatch. That gentleman, by some feat of legerdemain, called up from the bowels of the earth, or from one of those mysterious localities known as round the corner, 2 sprites, one his immediate assistant, seedier, however, and not jewelled, who carried a knobby stick which he continually gnawed. The other, a horrible little man with a white head and a white neckcloth twisted round his neck like a halter. His eye was red, and his teeth were gone, and the odour of rum compassed him about like a cloak. To these 2 acolytes my notes were confided, and they were directed to bring the answers like lightning to Blowman's. To Blowman's, in Cursitor Street, Chancery Lane, I was bound, and a cab was straightway called for my conveyance thereto. For the matter of that, the distance was so short I might easily have walked, but I could not divest myself of the idea that everybody in the street knew I was a prisoner. I was soon within the hospitable doors of Mr. Blowman, officer to the Sheriff of Middlesex. His hospitable doors were double, and for more hospitality, heavily barred, locked and chained. These, with the exceptions of barred windows and a species of grating-roofed yard outside, like a monster bird-cage, were the only visible signs of captivity. Yet there was enough stone in the hearts and iron in the souls of Mr. Blowman's inmates to build a score of lock-up houses. For that you may take my word. I refused the offer of a private room and was conducted to the coffee room, where Mr. Aminadab left me for a while to my own reflections and to wait for the answers to my letters. They came, and one friend into the bargain. Jones had gone to Hammersmith and wouldn't be back till next July. Brown had been disappointed in the city. Robinson's money was all locked up. Thompson expected to be locked up himself. Jackson was brief but explicit. He said he would rather not. My friend brought me a carpet bag with what clothes I wanted in it. He advised me, moreover, to go to Whitecross Street at once, for a sojourn at Mr. Bloman's domicile would cost me something like £1 per diem. So, summoning Mr. Aminadab, who had obligingly waited to see if I could raise the money or not, I announced my intention of being conveyed to jail at once. I paid £0.50 for the accommodation I had had at Mr. Bloman's. I made a pecuniary acknowledgment of Mr. Aminadab's politeness, and I did not fail to remember the old man in the white halter and the spirituous mantle. Then, when I had also remembered a red-headed little Jew boy who acted as Cerberus to this Hades and appeared to be continually washing his hands, though they never seemed one whit the cleaner for the operation, another cab was called, and off I went to Whitecross Street, with a heart considerably heavier than a paving stone. I had already been 3 hours in captivity, and it was getting on for 8 o'clock. The cab was proceeding along Holborn, and I thought, involuntarily, of Mr. Samuel Hall, black and grimy, making his progress through the same thoroughfare by the Oxford Road and on to Tyburn, bowing to the crowd and cursing the ordinary. The foot pavement on either side was thronged with people at their Christmas marketing, or, at least, on some Christmas business, so it seemed to me. Goose clubs were being held at the public houses, sweeps for sucking pigs, plum puddings and bottles of gin. Some ladies and gentlemen had begun their Christmas rather too early and were meandering unsteadily over the flagstones. Fiddlers were in great request, being sought for in small beer shops and borne off bodily from bars to assist at Christmas Eve merrymakings. An immense deal of handshaking was going on, and I was very much afraid, a good deal more standing than was consistent with the strict rules of temperance. Everyone kept saying that it was only once a year, and made that an apology, so prone are mankind to the use of trivial excuses, for their sins against Father Matthew. Loud laughter rang through the frosty air. Pleasant jokes, innocent chaff passed. Grocers' young men toiled lustily, wiping their hot faces ever and anon. Butchers took no rest. Prize beef melted away from very richness before my eyes. And in the midst of all the bustle and jollity, the crowding, laughing, drinking and shouting, I was still on my unvarying way to Whitecross Street. There was a man resting a child's coffin on a railing and chattering with a potboy with whom he shared a pot of porter, with the sharp edge taken off. There are heavy hearts, heavier perchance than yours in London this Christmas Eve, my friend Prooper, thought I. Tomorrow's dawn will bring sorrow and faint-heartedness to many thousands, to oceans of humanity, of which you are but a single drop. The cab had conveyed me through Smithfield Market and now rumbled up Barbican. My companion, the gentleman with the crab-stick, to whose care Mr. Aminadab had consigned me, beguiled the time with pleasant and instructive conversation. He told me that he had nabbed a many parties, that he had captured a doctor of divinity going to a Christmas, a bridegroom starting for the honeymoon, a colonel of hussars in full fig for Her Majesty's drawing-room, that he had the honour once of nabbing the eldest son of a peer of the realm, who, however, escaped from him through a second-floor window and over the tiles, that he was once commissioned to nab the celebrated Mr. Wicks of the Theatres Royal, that Mr. Wicks, being in the act of playing the Baron Spolaccio in the famous tragedy of Love, Ruin and Revenge, he, Crabstick, permitted him, in deference to the interests of the drama, to play the part out, stationing an assistant at each wing to prevent escape, that the delusive Wicks bilked him by going down a trap, that he, Crabstick, captured him notwithstanding under the stage, though opposed by the gigantic Wicks himself, 2 stage carpenters, a demon, and the 3rd citizen. That Wicks rushed on the stage and explained his position to the audience, whereupon the gallery, Wicks being an especial favourite of theirs, expressed a strong desire to have his, Crabstick's, blood, and, failing to obtain that, tore up the benches, in the midst of which operation the recalcitrant Wicks was removed. With these and similar anecdotes of the nobility, gentry, and the public in general, he was kind enough to regale me until the cab stopped. I alighted in a narrow, dirty street, was hurried up a steep flight of steps, a heavy door clanged behind me, and Crabstick, pocketing his small gratuity, wished me a good night and a Merry Christmas. A Merry Christmas? Ugh! That night I slept in a dreadful place called the reception ward, on an iron bedstead, in a room with a stone floor. I was alone and horribly miserable. I heard the waits playing in the distance, and dreamed I was at a Christmas party. Christmas morning in Whitecross Street Prison. A turnkey conducted me to the Middlesex side, a long dreary yard, on either side of which were doors leading into wards or coffee rooms on the ground floor, and by stone staircases to sleeping apartments above. It was all very cold, very dismal, very gloomy. I entered the ward allotted to me, number 7 left. It was a long room with barred windows, cross tables and benches, with an aisle between. A large fire at the farther end. Dum spiro spero painted above the mantelpiece. 20 or 30 prisoners and their friends were sitting at the tables, smoking pipes, drinking beer, or reading newspapers. But for the unmistakable jailbird look about the majority of the guests, the unshorn faces, the slipshod feet, the barred windows, and the stone floor, I might have fancied myself in a large tap room. There was holly and mistletoe round the gas pipes, but how woeful and forlorn they looked. There was roast beef and plum pudding preparing at the fireplace, but they had neither the odour nor the appearance of free beef and pudding. I was thinking of the cosy room, the snug fire, the well-drawn curtains, the glittering table, the happy faces, when the turnkey introduced me to the steward of the ward, an officer appointed by the prisoners, and a prisoner himself, who tables you off, i.e., who allotted me a seat at one of the cross tables, which was henceforward mine for all purposes of eating, drinking, writing, or smoking, in consideration of a payment on my part of 1 guinea sterling. This sum made me also free of the ward, and entitled to have my boots cleaned, my bed made, and my meals cooked. Supposing that I had not possessed a guinea, which was likely enough, I should have asked for time, which would have been granted me. But, at the expiration of 3 days, omission of payment would have constituted me a defaulter, in which case the best thing I could have done would have been to declare pauperism and remove to the poor side of the prison. Here I should have been entitled to my sixpences, amounting in the aggregate to the sum of 3 shillings and 6pence a week towards my maintenance. The steward, a fat man in a green wide-awake hat, who was incarcerated on remand for the damages in an action for breach of promise of marriage, introduced me to the cook, who was going up next week to the insolvent court, having filed his schedule as a beer shop keeper. He told me that if I chose to purchase anything at a species of everything shop in the yard, the cook would dress it. Or, if I did not choose to be at the trouble of providing myself, I might breakfast, dine and sup at his, the steward's table, for a consideration, as Mr. Trapboy's had it. I acceded to the latter proposition, receiving the intelligence that turkey and oyster sauce were to be ready at 2 precisely, with melancholy indifference. Turkey had no charms for me now. I sauntered forth into the yard and passed 50 or 60 fellow unfortunates sauntering as listlessly as myself. Strolling about, I came to a large grating, somewhat similar to Mr. Blowman's bird cage, in which was a heavy gate called the lock, and which communicated with the corridors leading to the exterior of the prison. Here sat, calmly surveying his caged birds within, a turnkey, not a repulsive, gruff-voiced monster, with a red neckerchief and top boots, and a bunch of keys, as turnkeys are popularly supposed to be, but a pleasant, jovial man enough, in sleek black. He had a little lodge behind, where a bright fire burned, and where Mrs. Turnkey and the little turnkeys lived. I found a direful resemblance between the name of his office and that of the Christmas bird. His Christmas dinner hung to the iron bars above him, in the shape of a magnificent piece of beef. Happy turnkey, to be able to eat it on the outer side of that dreadful grating. In another part of the yard hung a large black board, inscribed in half-effaced characters, with the enumerations of divers donations made in former times by charitable persons for the benefit in perpetuity of poor prisoners. Today, so much beef and so much strong beer was allotted to each prisoner. But what were beef and beer? What was unlimited tobacco, or even the plum pudding, when made from prison plums, boiled in a prison copper, and eaten in a prison dining room? What though surreptitious gin were carried in bladders, beneath the undergarments of the fairer portion of creation? What though brandy was smuggled into the wards, disguised as black draughts or extract of sarsaparilla? A pretty Christmas market I had brought my pigs to. Chapel was over. I had come down too late from the reception to attend it, and the congregation, a lamentably small one, dispersed in the yard and wards. I entered my own ward to change, if anything could change, the dreary scene. Smoking and cooking appeared to be the chief employments and recreations of the prisoners. An insolvent clergyman in rusty black was gravely rolling out puff paste on a pie-board, and a man in his shirt-sleeves, covering a veal cutlet with egg and bread-crumb, was an officer of dragoons. I found no lack of persons willing to enter into conversation with me. I talked full 20 minutes with a seedy captive with a white head and a coat buttoned and pinned up to the chin. Whitecross Street, he told me, or Burden's Hotel, as in the prison slang he called it, was the only place where any life was to be seen. The Fleet was pulled down, the Marshalsea had gone the way of all brick and mortar, the Queen's Prison, the Old Bench, was managed on a strict system of classification and general discipline, and Horsemonger Lane was but rarely tenanted by debtors. But in favoured Whitecross Street, the good old features of imprisonment for debt yet flourished. Good dinners were still occasionally given. Fives and football were yet played, and from time to time obnoxious attorneys or importunate process servers, rats as they were called, were pumped upon, flowered and bonneted. Yet even Whitecross Street, he said with a sigh, was falling off. The Small Debts Act and those revolutionary county courts would be too many for it soon. That tall, robust, bushy-whiskered man, he said, in the magnificently flowered dressing-gown, the crimson Turkish smoking cap, the velvet slippers, and the ostentatiously displayed gold guard chain, was a mace-man, an individual who lived on his wits, on the want of wit in others. He had had many names, varying from Plantagenet and De Courcy to Edmundston and Co., or plain Smith, or Johnson. He was a real gentleman once upon a time, a very long time ago. Since then he had done a little on the turf, and a great deal in French hazard, roulette, and rouge et noir. He had cheated bill discounters and discounted bills himself. He had been a picture dealer and a wine merchant, and one of those mysterious individuals called a commission agent. He had done a little on the stock exchange, and a little billiard marking, and a little skittle sharping, and a little thimble rigging. He was not particular. Bills, however, were his passion. He was under a cloud just now in consequence of some bill-dealing transaction, which the Commissioner of Insolvency had broadly hinted to be like a bill-stealing one. However, he had wonderful elasticity, and it was to be hoped would soon get over his little difficulties. Meanwhile he dined sumptuously and smoked cigars of price, occasionally condescending to toss half-crowns in a hat with any of the other nobs incarcerated. That cap and the battered, worn-out, sickly frame beneath, if I would have the goodness to notice them, were all that were left of a spruce, rosy-cheeked, glittering young ensign of infantry. He was brought up by an old maiden aunt who spent her savings to buy him a commission in the army. He went from Slow Chester Grammar School to Fast Chester Barracks. He was to live on his pay. He gambled a year's pay away in an evening. He made 1,000-guinea bets and lost them. So the old denouement of the old story came round as usual. The silver dressing case got on credit, pawned for ready money. The credit horses sold. More credit horses bought. Importunate creditors in the barrack yard. A letter from the colonel. Sale of his commission. Himself sold up. Then Mr. Aminadab, Mr. Blowman, Burden's Hotel, insolvent court, a year's remand, and an afterlife embittered by the consciousness of wasted time and talents and wantonly neglected opportunities. My informant pointed out many duplicates of the gentleman in the dressing-gown, also divers government clerks who had attempted to imitate the nobs in a small way, and had only succeeded to the extent of sharing the same prison. A mild, grey-headed old gentleman who always managed to get committed for contempt of court, and the one inevitable baronet of a debtor's prison, who is traditionally supposed to have 8,000 a year, and to stop in prison because he likes it, though, to say the truth, this baronet looked to me as if he didn't like it at all. I was sick of all these and of everything else in Whitecross Street before 9 o'clock, when I was at liberty to retire to my cold ward. So ended my Christmas Day, my first, and I hope and believe, my last Christmas Day in prison. Next day my welcome friend arrived and set me free. I paid the gate fees, and I gave the turnkeys a crown, and I gave the prisoners unbounded beer. I kept New Year's Day in company with a pretty cousin with glossy black hair, who was to have dined with me on Christmas Day, and who took such pity on me that she shortly became Mrs. Prupper. Our eldest boy was born, by a curious coincidence, next Christmas Day, which I kept very jovially with the doctor after it was all over, and we didn't christen him Whitecross. End of chapter 5.
Section 6 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. The Orphan's Dream of Christmas by Eliza Griffiths. It was Christmas Eve, and lonely, by a garret window high, where the city chimneys barely spared a hand's breadth of the sky, sat a child in age, but weeping, with a face so small and thin that it seemed too scant a record to have 8 years traced therein. Oh, grief looks most distorted when his hideous shadow lies on the clear and sunny life stream that doth fill a child's blue eyes. But her eye was dull and sunken, and the whitened cheek was gaunt, and the blue veins on the forehead were the penciling of want. And she wept for years like jewels, till the last year's bitter gall, like the acid of the story, in itself had melted all. But the Christmas time returned, as an old friend for whose eye she would take down all the pictures sketched by faithful memory of those brilliant Christmas seasons, when the joyous laugh went round, when sweet words of love and kindness were no unfamiliar sound, when, lit by the log's red luster, she her mother's face could see, and she rocked the cradle, sitting on her own twin brother's knee. Of her father's pleasant stories, of the riddles and the rhymes, all the kisses and the presents that had marked those Christmas times. 'Twas as well that there was no one, for it were a mocking strain to wish her a Merry Christmas, for that could not come again. How there came a time of struggling, when in spite of love and faith, grinding poverty would only in the end give place to death. How her mother grew heartbroken when her toil-worn father died, took her baby in her bosom, and was buried by his side. How she clung unto her brother as the last spar from the wreck, but stern death had come between them while her arms were round his neck. There were now no loving voices, and if few hands offered bread, there were none to rest in blessing on the little homeless head. Or if any gave her shelter, it was less of joy than fear, for they welcomed crime more warmly to the self-same room with her. But at length they all grew weary of their sick and useless guest. She must try a workhouse welcome for the helpless and distressed. But she prayed, and the unsleeping in his ear that whisper caught, so he sent down sleep, who gave her such a respite as she sought, drew the fair head to her bosom, pressed the wetted eyelids close, and with softly falling kisses lulled her gently to repose. Then she dreamed the angels, sweeping with their wings the sky aside, raised her swiftly to the country where the blessed ones abide, to a bower all flushed with beauty, by a shadowy arcade, where a mellowness like moonlight by the tree of life was made, where the rich fruit sparkled star-like, and pure flowers of fadeless dye poured their fragrance on the waters that in crystal beds went by, where bright hills of pearl and amber closed the fair green valleys round, and with rainbow light but lasting were their glistening summits crowned. Then that distant burning glory, mid a gorgeousness of light, the long vista of archangels could scarce chasten to her sight. There sat one, and her heart told her 'twas the same who, for our sin, was once born a little baby in the stable of an inn. There was music, oh such music, They were trying the old strains that a certain group of shepherds heard on old Judea's plains. But when that divinest chorus to a softened trembling fell, love's true ear discerned the voices that on earth she loved so well. At a tiny grotto's entrance, a fair child her eyes behold, with his ivory shoulders hidden 'neath his curls of living gold. And he asks them, is she coming? But ere any one can speak, the white arms of her twin brother are once more about her neck. Then they all come round her greeting, but she might have well denied that her beautiful young sister is the poor pale child that died, and the careful look hath vanished from her father's tearless face, and she does not know her mother till she feels the old embrace. Oh, from that ecstatic dreaming must she ever wake again, to the cold and cheerless contrast, to a life of lonely pain. But her Maker's sternest servant to her side on tiptoe stepped, told his message in a whisper, and she stirred not as she slept. Now the Christmas morn was breaking with a dim, uncertain hue, and the chilling breeze of morning came the broken window through, and the hair upon her forehead, was it lifted by the blast, or the brushing wings of seraphs with their burden as they passed? All the festive bells were chiming to the myriad hearts below, but that deep sleep still hung heavy on the sleeper's thoughtful brow. To her quiet face the dreamlight had a lingering glory given, but the child herself was keeping her Christmas day in heaven. End of section 6.
Chapter 7 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. What Christmas Is After a Long Absence by Samuel Sidney. 16 years have passed since, a turbulent, discontented boy, I left England for Australia. My first serious study of geography began when I twirled about a great globe to find South Australia, which was then the fashionable colony. My guardians, I was an orphan, were delighted to get rid of so troublesome a personage, so very soon I was the proud possessor of a town and country lot of land in the model colony of South Australia. My voyage in a capital ship, with the best fare every day, and no one to say, "Charles, you have had enough wine," was pleasant enough. Very different from the case of some of my emigrating companions, fathers and mothers with families who had left good homes, good incomes, snug estates, and respectable professions, excited by speeches at public meetings or by glowing pamphlets descriptive of the charms of a colonial life in a model colony. I learned to smoke, drink grog, and hit a bottle swung from the yardarm with pistol or rifle. We had several very agreeable scamps on board, ex-cornets and lieutenants, ex-government clerks, spoiled barristers and surgeons, plucked Oxonians, empty, good-looking, well-dressed fellows who had smoked meerschaums, drunk champagne, hock and burgundy, fought duels, ridden steeplechases, and contracted debts in every capital in Europe. These distinguished gentlemen kindly took me under their patronage, smoked my cigars, allowed me to stand treat for champagne, taught me, at some slight expense, the arts of short whist, écarté, and unlimited loo, and to treat with becoming hauteur any advances on the part of the intermediate passengers. By the end of 100 days of our voyage, I was remarkably altered, but whether improved may be a question, as the leading principles I had imbibed were to the effect that work of any kind was low, and that debts were gentlemanly. My preconceived notions of a model colony, with all the elements of civilization, as promised in London, were rather upset by observing on landing, just within the wash of high water on the sandy beach, heaps of furniture, a grand piano or two, and chests of drawers in great numbers, and I especially remember a huge iron-banded oak plate chest, half full of sand and empty. The cause of this wholesale abandonment was soon made plain to me, in the shape of a charge of £10 for conveying my trunks in a bullock waggon, of which they formed less than half the load, 7 miles from the port to the city of Adelaide. The said city, which looked so grand in watercolours in the emigration rooms in London, being at that time a picturesque and uncomfortable collection of tents, mud huts, and wooden cottages, curiously warped, rather larger than a Newfoundland dog's kennel, but letting for the rent of a mansion in any agricultural county of England. It is not my intention now to tell the tale of the fall of the model colony and colonists of South Australia and the rise of the copper mines, which I did not stay to see. When a general smash was taking place on all sides, I accepted the offer of a rough diamond of an overlander who had come across from the old colony with a lot of cattle and horses to sell to the Adelaideans. He had taken a fancy to me in consequence of the skill I had displayed in bleeding a valuable colt at a critical moment, one of the few useful things I had learned in England, and when my dashing companions were drinking themselves into delirium tremens, enlisting in the police, accepting situations as shepherds, sponging for dinners on the once despised snobs, and imploring the captains of ships to let them work their way home before the mast, he offered to take me with him to his station in the interior and make a man of me. I turned my back on South Australia and abandoned my country lot on an inaccessible hill to nature, and sold my town lot for £5. I began to perceive that work was the only means of getting on in a colony. Accordingly, into the far bush I went, and on the plains of a new settled district, all solitary, constantly in danger from savage blacks, constantly occupied in looking after the wild shepherds and stockmen, herdsmen, of my overland friend, passing days on horseback at one period, at another compelled to give my whole attention to the details of a great establishment, I rubbed off my old skin. My fashionable affectations died away. My life became a reality, dependent on my own exertions. It was then that my heart began to change. It was then that I began to think tenderly of the brothers and sisters I had left behind, and with whom I had communicated so little in the days of my selfishness. Rarely oftener than twice in a year could I find means to forward letters, but the pen, once so hateful to me, became now, in hours of leisure, my great resource. Often and often have I sat in my hut at midnight, filling pages with my thoughts, my feelings, my regrets. The fire burning before my hut, where my men were sleeping, reminded me that I was not alone in the great pastoral desert, which, sloping away from my station, rolled for hundreds of miles. Every sound was redolent of the romance of the strange land to which I had transplanted myself. The howl of the dingo prowling round my sheepfolds, the defying bark of my watchful dogs, the cry of the strange night birds, and sometimes, echoing from the rocky ranges, the wild mountainous songs of the fierce aborigines as they danced their corroborees and acted dramas representing the slaughter of the white man and the plunder of his cattle. When such noises met my ear, I looked up to the rack where my arms lay, ready loaded, and out to where a faithful sentinel, the rebel O'Donoghue, or the poacher Giles Brown, with musket on shoulder, paced up and down, ready to die, but not to surrender. In this great desert, the petty cares, mean tricks of land jobbing, all the little contrivances for keeping up appearances no longer needed, were forgotten. My few books were not merely read, they were learned by heart. If in the morning I tired horses in galloping my rounds, and settled strife among my men with rude words, and even blows, in the evening, sitting apart, I was lost in the wanderings of Abraham, the trials of Job, or the Psalms of David. I followed St. John into the wilderness, not unlike that before my eyes, and listened, far from cities, to the Sermon on the Mount. At other times, as I paced along the open forests, I made the woods resound with the speeches of Homer's heroes, or the outbursts of Shakespeare's characters, outbursts that came home to me, for, in those lone regions, I was chief, warrior, and almost priest. For, when there was a death, I read the funeral service, and thus I educated myself. Whilst thus recalling friends neglected and opportunities misused, and pleasant scenes of eastern county life, I most loved to dwell upon the Christmas time of dear old England. In our hot summer of Australian December, when the great river that divided and bounded my pastures drivelled to a string of pools, and my cattle were panting around, at the quiet hour of the evening, when the stars, shining with a brilliancy unknown in northern climes, realized the idea of the blessed night when the Star of Bethlehem startled and guided the kings of the eastern world on their pious pilgrimage, my thoughts travelled across the sea to England. I did not feel the sultry heat, or hear the cry of the night bird, or the howl of the dingo. I was across the sea, among the Christmas revellers. I saw the gay, flushed faces of my kindred and friends shining round the Christmas table. The grace was said, the toast went round. I heard my own name mentioned, and the gay faces grew sad. Then I awoke from my dream and found myself alone, and wept. But in a life of action there is no time for useless grieving, though time enough for reflection and resolution. Therefore, after visions like these, I resolved that the time should come when, on a Christmas day, the toast, to absent friends, should be answered by the Australian himself. The time did come, this very year of the half-century. Earnest labour and sober economy had prospered with me. The rich district in which I was one of the earliest pioneers had become settled and pacified as far as the river ran. The wild miles had grown into the tame, blanket-clothed dependence of the settlers. Thousands of fine-wooled flocks upon the hills and cattle upon the rich flats were mine. The bark hut had changed into a verandahed cottage, where books and pictures formed no insignificant part of the furniture. Neighbours were within a ride. The voices of children often floated sweetly along the waters of the river. Then said I to myself, I can return now, not to remain, for the land I have conquered from the wilderness shall be my home for life, but I will return to press the hands that have longed for many years to press mine, to kiss away the tears that dear sisters shed when they think of me, once almost an outcast, to take upon my knees those little ones who have been taught to pray for their uncle in a far land across the broad deep sea. Perhaps I had a thought of winning some rosy English face and true English heart to share my pastoral home. I did return, and trod again the shores of my mother country. My boyish expectations had not been realized, but better hopes had. I was not returning laden with treasures to rival the objects of my foolish, youthful vanity, but I was returning thankful, grateful, contented, independent, to look round once more on my native land, and then return to settle in the land of my adoption. It was midwinter when I landed at a small fishing village in the extreme west of England, for my impatience made me take advantage, during a calm in the channel, of the first fisher's boat that boarded us. The nearer we approached the shore, the more impatient I grew to land. I insisted on giving my help to one of the heavy oars, and no sooner had we touched the ground than, throwing myself into the water, I waded on shore. Oh, easy-going men of the great world, there are some pleasures you can never taste. And among them is the enthusiasm, the heartfelt, awe-stricken admiration of the dweller among pastoral plains when he finds himself once more at home among the gardens of England. Garden is the only word to express the appearance of England, especially the west, where the bright green myrtle lingers through the winter, and the roadside near every town is bordered with charming cottages. At every mile I found some new object of admiration. Above all, the healthful, fresh cheeks of the people, especially the sturdy, yet delicate complexioned lasses tripping away, basket in hand, from the markets in numbers, startling to one who had lived long where the arrival of one fair white face was an event. The approach to the first great town was signalized by tokens less pleasing, nay, absolutely painful. Beggars, as I passed, stood in their rags and whined for alms, and others, no less pitiful in appearance, did not beg, but looked so worn and miserable that it made my heart bleed. I gave to all, so that the man who drove me stared. He stared still more when I told him that I came from a country where there were no poor, save the drunken and the idle. Entering a great town, the whirl, the commotion of passers on foot, on horseback, and in vehicles of all kinds, made me giddy. It was like a sort of nightmare. The signs of wealth, the conveniences provided for every imaginable want, were very strange to me, fresh from a country where able-bodied labour was always in demand, while a man thought himself equal to the longest journey through an untrodden country, with a blanket and a tin pot for all his furniture and all his cooking apparatus. When I called in the landlord of the inn to consult about getting on to Yorkshire in 2 days, as I wished to be with my friends as soon as possible, he said, "If you stay and rest tonight, you can get there by the railroad tomorrow morning, in good time to eat your Christmas dinner." I had never thought of that, and had only a vague idea what a railroad was like. I reached the starting place next morning, just in time to take my seat in a departing train. I started when, with a fearful sound of labouring machinery, we moved, then whirled away. I was ashamed of my fears, yet there were many in that train to whom a sea voyage would have only been less terrible than the solitary land journeys on horseback through the bush of Australia, which were to me a mere matter of course. Without accident I reached the station near York, where I had to take a conveyance to reach by a cross-country road the house where I knew that one of my brothers, farming a few hundred acres of his own land, assembled as many of our family as possible at Christmas time. The little inn was able to supply a gig, driven by a decayed postboy. Plunging at once into questioning conversation, I found an old acquaintance in the driver, without revealing who I was, not many years older than myself. Soured, disappointed, racked in health, he took a different view of life to anything I had yet heard. All along my road through England, I had been struck by the prosperous condition of the well-to-do people I had met in first-class carriages. His occupation, his glory, was departed. He was obliged to do anything and wear anything, instead of his once smart costume and once pleasant occupation, instead of his gay jacket and rapid ride and handsome presents from travellers and good dinners from landlords. In doleful spirits he had a score of tales to tell of others worse off than himself, of landlords of posting-houses in the workhouse, and smart four-in-hand coachmen begging their bread, of farmers sunk down to labourers, and other doleful stories of the fate of those who were not strong enough for the race of life in England. Then I began to see there are two sides to the life that looked so brilliant out of the plate-glass windows of a first-class carriage. The luxuries and comforts which taxis and turnpikes buy are well worth the cost to those who can pay them. Those who cannot will do better to make shift in a colony. Thus thinking and talking, as I approached the place where, unexpected, I was to appear before a gathering of my relations, my flow of spirits died away. The proud consciousness of having conquered fortune, the beauty of the winter scenery, for winter, with its hoar-frost shading the trees and foliage, has strange dazzling beauty to the eyes of those who have been accustomed to the one perpetual green-brown of semi-tropical Australia, had filled me full to overflowing with bounding joyousness. Gaily I answered back to the "Good night, master," of the passing peasantry, and vigorously puffed at my favourite pipe in clouds that rivalled and rolled along with the clouds of mist that rose from the sweating horses. But the decayed postillion's stories of misery, in which he seemed to revel, damped me. My pipe went out, and my chin sunk despondingly on my breast. At length I asked, did he know the Barnards? Oh, yes, he knew them all. Mr. John had been very lucky with the railroad through one of his farms. He had ridden a pair at Miss Margaret's wedding and driven a mourning coach at Miss Mary's funeral. The mare in the gig had belonged to Mr. John and had been a rare good hunter. Mr. Robert had doctored him for his rheumatics. Did he know any more? Oh, yes, there was Master Charles. He went abroad somewhere to foreign parts. Some people say he's dead, got killed or hung or something, and some say he's made a power of money. He was a wild slip of a lad. Many a time he's been out in the roads with someone I know very well, snaring hares and smoking of pheasants. There's a mark on my forehead now where I fell when he put a furze bush under the tail of a colt I was breaking. He was a droll chap, surely. There was scarcely a kind feeling in the poor man's breast. The loss of his occupation, poverty and drink had sadly changed the fine country lad, barely 10 years older than myself, whom I had left behind in England. So, turning, I said, Well, Joe, you don't seem to remember me. I am Charles Barnard. Lord, sir, he answered in a whining tone, I beg your pardon, you are a great gentleman. I always thought you would be. So you are going to dine with Mr. John? Well, sir, I hope you won't forget a Christmas box for old acquaintance' sake. I was repelled and wished myself back in Australia. My mind began to misgive me as to the wisdom of my unexpected visit. It was bright moonlight when we drove into the village. I had a mile to walk. I would not let Chattering Joe drive me, so left him happy over a hot supper with no stinted allowance of ale. I walked on quickly until approaching the old house, the mansion house once, but the estates had long been divided from it. I paused. My courage failed as I passed through the gate. Their clang disturbed the dogs. They began to bark fiercely. I was a stranger. The dogs that knew me were all dead. Twice I paced round, with difficulty repressing my emotion, before I could find courage to approach the door. The peals of laughter, the gay music that rang out from time to time, the lights flying from window to window of the upper rooms, filled me with pleasing, painful feelings, long unknown. There was folly in my mysterious arrival, but romance is part of a life of solitude. Unreasonably, I was for a moment vexed that they could be so merry, but next moment better thoughts prevailed. I stepped to the well-remembered door and rang a great peal. The maid opened it to me without question, for many guests were expected. As I stooped to lay aside my cloak and cap, a lovely child in white ran down the stairs, threw her arms round my neck, and with a hearty kiss cried, I have caught you under the mistletoe, Cousin Alfred. Then she started from me, and loosening her hold, and staring at me with large, timid brown eyes, said, "Who are you? You are not a new uncle, are you?" Oh, how my heart was relieved. The child saw a likeness. I should not be disowned. All my plans, all my preparations were forgotten. I was in the midst of them, and after 15 years I saw again the Christmas fire, the Christmas table, the Christmas faces that I had dreamed of so often. To describe that night is impossible. Long after midnight we sat. The children unwillingly left my knees for bed. My brothers gazed and wondered. My sisters crowded round me, kissed my brown bearded cheeks, and pressed my sunburned hands. Many new scenes of blessed Christmas may I have, never one like that which welcomed the wanderer home. But although England has its blessed seasons and festivals, in which Christmas Day stands first, and although that Christmas meeting will often and again be before my eyes, I cannot stay in England. My life is moulded to my adopted country, and where I have earned fortune, there I will spend it. The restraints, the conventionalities, the bonds created by endless divisions of society are more than I can endure. Care seems to sit on every brow, and scornful pride in imaginary social superiority on too many. I have found the rosy English face and the true English heart. Someone who listened to the Australian stories of my Christmas week, which my friends were never tired of hearing, is ready to leave all and follow me to my pastoral home. I am now preparing for departure, and neither society, nor books, nor music will be wanting in what was, when I first knew it, a forest and grassy desert peopled with wild birds and kangaroos. Nearly 20 relations accompany me, some of them poor enough. In a few years you may find the Barnard Town settlement on Australian maps, and there, at Christmas time, or at any time, true men and good women shall meet with welcome and help from me, for I shall never forget that I once began the world, a shepherd in a solitude, and gazed on the bright stars of a Christmas night, shining in a hot and cloudless sky. End of chapter 7.
Section 8 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. Section 8. What Christmas Is If You Outgrow It, by T.W.A. Buckley. The floods round the little classic town of Bull Ferry were frozen. The trees round the meadows of St. Agnes Dei de Pompadour were the same. Dons went to chapel regularly, but the dean of St. Agnes appeared in an extensive funeral-looking cloak, and the sub-dean coughed louder and made more mistakes in the responses, by reason of deafness, than heretofore. Coal and blanket societies were talked of. In few words, Christmas was fast approaching, and university men were looking forward to spending that season in town or country, according to their residence, inclinations, or invitations. Among the many young men who stood on the platform awaiting the blazing dragon, which in 2 hours' time was to convey them to London, perhaps to take a chop at the Cock, a little dinner at Very's, and a 3 and 6-penny cab fare to some other station, was Mr. Horace Delisle, a freshman who had come up in the preceding October, and was now hastening back to the paternal hearth at St. Maurice, a charming little vicarage in Warwickshire, just large enough to be the best house in the village, just small enough to be sociable, allowing of half a dozen spare beds. Practically religious, without any morbid affectation of any isms, the Reverend Augustus de Lisle was the best and most popular parson for miles around. His income might be some 400 a year, besides a little property in the funds, but judicious economy and a little success in gentleman farming made it go very far, and St. Maurice Rectory boasted its occasional dinner party, its billiard room, and its plain carriage, while few of the poor or sick ever went away unrelieved. Mrs. de Lisle was a good and clever woman, and educated her own daughters, which saved money and morals at the same time. However, like the generality of clergymen who have not much preferment, and who really do good, the Reverend Augustus de Lisle had a large family. Girls, even when educated at home, cost something. Boys cost a great deal more, and cannot be kept at home. 2 or 3 had been got off his hands, but Horace had been a pet boy, kept at home a good deal through ill health. He was very amiable, loved his sisters and mother, and his father had made him a capital scholar. Several people were surprised when he took the St. Agnes Day scholarship, and took the bounce out of the Tipton and Whortleberry boys at the same time. And so Horace had been sent to the university with the promise of 80 or 100 pounds a year from his father, an odd present of 50 from an aunt, and a lot of tears, blessings, and hints at advice from his mother. He had now passed his first term. He had made up his mind to take a double first, the Iceland scholarship and the English verse. He found Arnold's Thucydides a very stupid book, and wondered how it was that nothing took in the publishing way, unless it was translated from the German. He believed in stunning feeds, and began to have some ideas on the subject of claret. But he had still far too much love for home to find even a lingering inclination for a further stay. Moreover, ambition seemed to send him homeward. The dean had said, in a gruff voice, "Very well, sir," to his construing of the birds of Aristophanes. The Reverend John Ogaunt, his tutor, had expanded his lank lips into a smile, and had commended his Latinity, and here was news for his father. Again he wanted to see Jack Harrogate, his old shooting companion, to whom his favourite sister Lucy was engaged. Jack was a tremendous, rough, manly fellow, with a very kind heart, and great powers of sociability. Even Bruiser of St. Alb Cornice, who had thrashed the Grinstead grinder, shrank into insignificance when compared with Jack, and Smillington of St. Una de Lion could not sing "Down Among the Dead Men" half so well. Besides all this, Horace had some few private anxieties and doubts, of which anon. Great as was the readiness and frequency with which slang phrases were bandied to and fro at the university, there was one little word which seemed more in use than any, and which half the university appeared to be living to illustrate. When Horace first appeared at St. Agnes' Day, one of his first proceedings was to pay for his furniture and to purchase the goodwill of the cups and saucers of the last inmate of his rooms. Several other ready-money transactions on a small scale evinced his desire and intention of avoiding debt, and as his father had not only advised him to do so, but had furnished him with the means of eking out the small allowance of his scholarship, he himself felt ill justified in overrunning his known income. But that word was sounding, ringing, dinning, and booming in his ears, hour after hour, day after day. That word was staring in his face, whizzing before his eyes, insinuating itself into his food, adulterating the wine he drank. It stared at him in the form of one man's boots, so much better fitting than old lasts at St. Maurice, in the broad stripe of another man's elegantly cut trousers, in the glossy hat of another, in the faultless, close-to-the-waist when unbuttoned dress coat of another. It took all sorts of forms. It would transfer itself into a walking cane at one end of a street, and at the end of another it had suddenly become a plaid scarf or a coral-headed breastpin. Sometimes it would appear as a Yorkshire pie, sometimes as a musical box. At one moment, just as he thought it was a pair of hairbrushes, it would suddenly turn itself into a steak and oyster sauce at Clifton's. In the dreams of men, it would haunt them. In their walks, it would cling to their very feet. In their reading moments, it lay open before them. In their smoking ones, it fumed with them. And that word was tick, tick, tick. But Horace was not in debt. Oh, no, he had only commenced a few accounts for things which one could not very well pay for till the end of term. And when the end of term came, he found he was obliged to write home for £5 to come home with. And this, as it was his first term, his father thought nothing of. Then he had been obliged to order one or two things at Stilty and Cabagenet, the great tailors. But there could be no harm in that, because their names were put down on the list of tradesmen his tutor had handed him. Then there were one or two little presents for his sisters, and a ring and a new watch-chain, which he could pay for next term, and one or two other matters, but nothing of consequence. If you had seen how Horace kissed his sisters and mother, and how happy and how jolly he seemed when he got home, you would have been pleased, I think. He was certainly more manly in speech and manner, and more confident in expressing opinions, but he had lost none of his social frankness and good nature. But Christmas was getting close at hand, and Horace, somehow or other, did not evince so lively an interest in the preparations for it as formerly. He said something in reference to their always boring about mincemeat, and he thought the charity school dinner might be managed cheaper and with less trouble at the schoolhouse than in their own kitchen. Moreover, his father could scarcely understand the necessity of his reading in a bright-colored chintz gown, lined with bright red silk, although his sisters thought it very pretty. His mother was afraid that his set of studs, representing little bunches of jeweled grapes, must have been rather expensive. But then he had always been a quiet boy at home, and would not do so again. He also drank more wine, and once laughed about boys taking 2 glasses of port after dinner. He ordered some pale ale up from London, and abused tea as ditch water, alleging that it hurt his nerves and prevented him from reading. He called his pony a mere hack, and showed discrimination in matters relating to horseflesh. But all these were minor difficulties, and Horace had too much real goodness of heart to ask his father for more money, or to obtrude his artificial wants, except in fits of occasional peevishness. Besides, the Bishop of St. Epps was so pleased with his debut at St. Agnes' Day that he had obtained for him an exhibition, which put another £30 a year into his pocket. This comforted him on the score of his present experiments with tick. Christmas passed away merrily. The house was a perfect bower of holly, good wholesome dinners, and lively hearty parties in the evening kept the St. Maurice Christmas in genuine, downright style. And then came more junketing. Laura, thinking that there was no particular occasion to run away to the lakes, as if marriage were a wicked action, said yes one evening to a curious question of Jack Harrington's, and absolutely got married next week. You may fancy what everybody said and did upon that occasion. And now came the time for Horace to go back, despite the domesticity of home, despite the absence of cold ducks at breakfast, of claret after dinner, and of lobster salad for supper, despite the rough want of etiquette, which led Jack Harrington to dance with his own wife, to prefer the ale of the St. Maurice and the Goat to Bass or Alsop, and to drink healths at his own dinner parties. Horace had not found so sincere or so soundly rational a companion at college. He went back, and with some regrets. It was a full 3 years, perhaps a trifle more, since Horace spent Christmas at his parental home. Many changes had taken place in that time. Laura is getting matronly on the strength of baby number 2. Jack is getting additionally serious, looks more sharply after business, and gives fewer, though not less sociable, parties. The Reverend, the vicar of St. Maurice, has got a small prebend, with the profits of which he has insured his life in favor of 3 yet unmarried daughters. This Christmas at St. Maurice bids fair to rival all past Christmases in jollity, merriment, and social delight. Jack has just cleared a few hundreds by a lucky bit of judicious speculation, and declares he will spare no expense in celebrating baby number 1's 2nd birthday, which falls on Boxing Day. But where is Horace? Will he be as sociable as he used to be? Will he come up a prodigy of scholarship and good nature, half a Don, yet with a whole and sound heart? The train is expected. Crowds are waiting on the platform, just as they waited this time 3 years since, and Horace is among them. But which is Horace? It cannot be that young gentleman with haughty looks, a delicately robust, or robustly delicate figure, a bundle of whips in his hand, and 2 Scotch terriers held in with a string. It cannot be that white overcoated, crush-hatted, stripe-shirted individual. And yet it is he, too. With whom is he talking? It cannot be. Yes, it is. It must be the Honorable Charlie Cracker. Where are they going? Surely Horace will go direct home. We doubt it. Arrived in London a little dinner at some West End house, beat up sprigs. Now in the 12th. 2 or 3 fellows that the Honorable Charlie Cracker knows. Horace must know them. Delisle of St. Agnes Day. Permit me to introduce you to my friend Spriggs, formerly of St. Walnut's de Grove, capital fellow only sent away for smashing the college pump. This in an aside. Adjourn to the Lyceum. Farce getting slow. So on to the Claret Cup, to hear Mr. Pope sing the Crossbones and Oh, Mrs. Manning. Get tired. So on again to the Parthenon Saloon. No dancing. Only look on, feel seedy. Soda water and brandy too light. Pale ale squeamish. Porter too heavy. And so to bed at Jarrett's Hotel. Headache, late hours in the morning. Fish breakfast at Greenwich. Rather better you may as well go home in a day or 2 as now, etc., etc. A day or 2 is soon gone. Horace thinks he may as well go on and look in at the governor, and so he leaves the Honorable Charlie Cracker. Honorable Charlie Cracker is not a rogue or a sharper. He is merely an ass. He is a pupil of Horace Delisle, besides, who has taken to coaching, and is open to any eligible offer with which 10 or 17 pounds a term is connected. He quits London with a sigh, takes out his purse with another, and a deeper sigh. Laura is as pretty a young mamma as you will meet in a long summer day's walk, and Horace cannot help thinking so. But he don't like babies, and baby number 1 has taken alarm at his handsomest terrier, and is squalling energetically. Jack's old-fashioned house, with the window door opening into a little snuggery of flowers and vegetables, is very different to Lady de Montfaucon's conservatory, where he used to play chess, smoke cigars, and sometimes read, with his last long vacation pupil, the future Earl of Spitalfields. At home it is much the same. There is not so much as a bottle of hock in the whole cellar. They will let the cat sleep on the rug in a dining-room, and the carriage is the same old-fashioned tub as ever. However, he gets over baby's birthday tolerably well, although he wishes Jack didn't know so many farmers. Besides, Jack will nurse baby Junior himself, and will hawk out baby Senior to shake his diminutive fists at newcomers in general. He feels glad to get back again to the rectory, but it is very slow there. His father doesn't know the Montmorencys or the Honorable Charlie Cracker, and wonders why he did not get the fellowship at St. Swithin. Furthermore, Bessie and Fanny have both got beaux, and the beaux are not university men. Tom Harris, the surgeon, would never do to introduce to the Honorable Charlie, although Tom has a snug little practice, and has furnished his house in a style that will outlast 500 university friendships, and will make Bessie a thoroughly good husband. Fanny's intended is the new curate, who is not over high church. In fact, Horace thinks him rather a pump, and wonders how he can live upon £120 a year. Horace owes a few odd £100, but Standish and Company and Stilty and Cabajonet are very quiet as yet, and he will give them a few pounds as soon as he can spare it. In fact, half the bills have not yet been sent in, for his debts are mostly of latter-day university growth. He has done respectably well in the school, but nothing more. He has, however, a large connection, picks up pupils, and does hope to pick up something else, indefinitely oscillating between the living of Dum-Dum and the gift of the Montmorency family. His scholarship will give him a title, something under government. He knows the Prime Minister's aunt's second cousin, and the woolsack. But all of his friends who used to hear him decide the fate of the continent in a speech of 20 minutes at the Vox et Praeterea Nihil Association fill him with notions of briefs, oyster breakfasts, and the temple. The difficulty is the money. Cold-blooded as he is grown to home associations, he has no heart to rob Bessie and Fanny of the few hundreds their father can give with them, still less to stint the younger members of their just meed of what he has himself enjoyed. But he is an unhappy creature. He wants everything and everybody except the things and people around him. He is reserved where he used to be open, parsimonious from necessity, where he was once generous. He cannot settle to anything, and the few days he has been at home have bored him as much as the conversation of the Honorable Charlie would have bored his father. Other people perceive the change, and even he begins to have a glimpse of self-reproach. But just as he is wondering why the deuce he thought of spending Christmas at home, a reprieve arrives in the shape of a letter from the Honorable Charlie, who, having in an evil hour accepted an invitation to his guardians, finds he has nobody to smoke or drink pale ale with, and conceives a sudden desire for reading. The pay is liberal, and if it were not, getting away from home for the remaining 9 or 10 days of the vacation would be a fair equivalent for any amount of instruction likely to be imbibed by the mental absorbance of Charlie's mind. Mrs. Delisle cannot bear the idea of her dear boy leaving home before even the pudding is finished, especially as Jack Harrington has invited the whole family to keep Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night at Jack's. Noisy children, country dances, perhaps snapdragon, and perhaps blind man's bluff, with sisters Bessie and Fanny slipping out on the staircase, and coming in with heightened complexions, looking as if they had been kissed by goblins in human shape. Twelfth Night characters, too. Perhaps draw a love motto with Polly Bright, the old half-pay admiral's daughter, about whom he once liked to be teased. Never. And so Horace goes away. His father, perhaps, feels but little grieved, for he hopes and thinks that his son's journey may tend to his future advantage, and he is too sensible to cherish that homesickness which sometimes prevents a man from ever making a home for himself. But his mother cannot bear his sublime disdain of all the little innocent things that once called forth his highest approbation. She is almost afraid Polly Bright looks thin and anxious, and she remembers that just 3 years ago Horace joked about his little wife, and she wishes that, even by one kind look, he had repeated the joke. It is all one to Horace, who is gone. To be happy, Horace, or to be really merry? My friend, a word in your ear. You may be quite sure that you have grown too fast when you find that you have outgrown Christmas. It is a very bad sign indeed. End of Section 8, read by Bill Mosley, Llano County, Texas, USA, December 20th, 2022.
Section 9 of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. What Christmas Is as We Grow Older and Other Stories. Section 9, The Round Game of the Christmas Bowl by R.H. Horne. This round game, which comes originally from fairyland, is thus played. The pool of the game is a capacious, circular bowl or basin made of ice. It is some 60 or 70 feet in circumference, and all around the rim there is stuck a hedge of holly boughs in full berry, interspersed with colored lamps and silver bells. Everybody who is inspired by the Christmas festivities comes to put into the pool. He is to put in something which is his pride. In doing this, he generally throws in something which is equally his trouble, and thus, by doing a generous act at Christmas and throwing away his pride, he at the same time gets rid of one of his worst troubles. The rhyme. Here's a pool all made of ice for a great round Christmas game. Its rim is set with holly green boughs and lamps of colored flame, with silver bells that tinkle and jingle as each one his offering comes to mingle. Whether ingot of gold or grey sea shingle, who comes first? 'Tis the king, I declare, with the crown in his hand and the frost in his hair. Close to the pool he brings his crown and tosses it o'er the holly. So away to the bottom goes all his pride and his royal melancholy. While jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gambol, dance, and sing. Who comes next is a minister of state with a puzzle made of weights and wheels and balanced on his pate. To the pool of Christmas offering the treasury lord advances. Southsover goes his puzzle, and away his lordship dances. While jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gambol, dance, and sing. Who comes next is the first gold stick and the first cocked hat, and the first general brick. In the pool they toss their darlings, sword, hat, stick, garniture, and retire to the allegro of the minuet de la cour. But while they caper back, 3 slaves to dress advance, in splendid killing curls and rouge, the last bright thought of France. They say 'tis Christmas time, to the round game we will come. Let's throw away our fashions, and for once let's look at home. While jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gambol, dance, and sing. But who comes now? 'Tis the bishop, in his carriage, whose shoulders bear the pain and pride of church and state mismarriage. A huge bale of lawn and purple he heaves into the pool, and nodding to his coachman, trips off relieved and cool. The millionaire comes next, with a loan to help a war. On the wrong side of all justice, his interest not so sure. He inflates and he collapses. His mind grows sick and dim. All the pangs of breeding money, his loan flutters o'er the brim. With jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gamble, dance, and sing. Who is this in red and gold? 'Tis a soldier with his sword, and riding on a cannon, bedizened, blessed, adored. Round his neck he wears a chain, for show and a pretence, but engraved with fiery letters, claiming blind obedience. His pride and bane are loosed, they blow o'er the holly fence. Next, a lawyer with his costs, making a full £1,000, with a score of breaking hearts, and 5 years of wastes and wounds. His face is cold and wretched, his life is but a span of red tape worm at best, and a black coat stuffed with bran. He tosses o'er his bill of costs, he's quite another man. With jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gamble, dance, and sing. The merchant brings his bargain, which would beggar half a town. The schemer shows a speck, but deserves each good man's frown. The scholar brings his book, where his soul all molting lies. The poet brings his laurel, and his castle in the skies. The lover brings his mistress, who has treated him with scorn. The shepherd brings his favourite lamb with its curly fleece unshorn. All these into the pool are cast with various smarts, as valued Christmas offerings, inspired with Christmas hearts. While jingle, tingle, jingle, how the sweet bells ring, and round about the lighted pool we gamble, dance, and sing. The crowd of players at the game, having joined hands in this concluding dance, now whirl around the pool of ice, gambling and singing, and they continue to do this until the charm begins to work, and the heat of the Christmas hearts outside causes the offering which each has thrown in to warm to such a genial glow that the heat thus collectively generated melts the ice. The pool gradually dissolves. The players of the game, one after another, sink down exhausted and fall into a delightful reverie, while the melted pool overflows and floats every one of them to his home, as he seems to lie in a mother-of-pearl boat with a branch of holly at the prow, and a coloured lamp amidst the green leaves and red berries. Each one, soon after, recovers his senses just enough to find himself lying comfortably in bed and listening to the waits. The end. End of section 9. End of What Christmas Is as We Grow Older, and Other Stories.